The autumn winds carried the scent of pine through Wyoming's rugged landscape, but Rebecca Mitchell barely noticed the beauty around her. She sat rigidly in the stagecoach, one hand clutching her worn leather satchel, the other absently touching the locket hidden beneath her high-collared dress. 3 years had passed since she'd fled Riverford in the dead of night, and now necessity was forcing her return. The stagecoach rattled over the uneven trail, each jolt reminding her of how precarious her situation truly was. The other passengers, an elderly couple and a businessman, absorbed in his newspaper, paid her little mind, for which she was grateful. Anonymity had become her closest companion. "We'll reach Riverford by nightfall, weather permitting," the driver called back through the window. Becca nodded, despite knowing he couldn't see her. Riverford. The name alone sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the crisp autumn air. She'd hoped never to return, but Dr. Sullivan's letter had left her no choice. "Your brother needs you," he'd written. "His condition worsens, and time is short." Jacob, her only living family, despite their estrangement. She couldn't ignore the summons, even if returning meant risking everything she'd worked to escape. The stagecoach rounded a sharp bend, and Becca gripped the seat as the vehicle tilted precariously. When it righted itself, she exhaled slowly, trying to calm her racing heart. Then she heard it, the pounding of hooves approaching rapidly from behind. The businessman finally looked up from his paper, confusion creasing his brow. The elderly woman clutched her husband's arm, her eyes widening in alarm. "Riders coming up fast," the driver shouted, his voice tight with tension. The crack of a whip followed, and the stagecoach lurched forward as the horses broke into a gallop. Becca's stomach dropped. She'd heard the stories of the Cooper gang, everyone in the territory had, but she'd never imagined becoming entangled in one of their notorious robberies. The stagecoach swayed dangerously as it picked up speed, the wheels bouncing over rocks and ruts in the trail. Through the window, Becca caught glimpses of riders in dark dusters, bandanas obscuring their faces, closing in on either side of the coach. A gunshot cracked the air. The businessman ducked down, cursing under his breath. Another shot, and the stagecoach began to slow. The driver's shout of pain told Becca all she needed to know. They weren't going to outrun these men. As the vehicle came to a lurching halt, Becca made a split-second decision. She slipped her hand into her satchel, fingers closing around the small Derringer pistol hidden among her belongings. She might be returning to Riverford as a dutiful sister, but she was no longer the helpless young woman who had fled 3 years ago. The stagecoach door wrenched open. A masked man pointed his revolver inside. "Nobody tries anything foolish," he warned, his voice muffled by the bandana. "Valuables in the bag, and nobody gets hurt." Behind him, Becca could see 4 other riders, all armed, all watching the scene unfold. One of them, taller than the rest, remained on his horse, observing from a slight distance. Even with his face partially covered, there was something commanding about his presence. This, she guessed, was Nathaniel Cooper himself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The elderly man fumbled with his pocket watch, while his wife removed her pearl necklace with trembling fingers. The businessman reluctantly contributed his wallet and gold cufflinks. When the outlaw turned his attention to Becca, she hesitated, her hand still hidden in her satchel. "The lady, too," the outlaw said, gesturing with his gun. "Whatever you've got hidden in that bag." "I have nothing of value," Becca replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "Just clothes and personal items." The outlaw snorted. "We'll be the judge of what's valuable." "Marcus!" The voice came from the mounted man, firm, commanding. "Bring her out." Marcus, the outlaw at the door, hesitated briefly before reaching in and roughly pulling Becca from the stagecoach. She stumbled onto the dusty trail, keeping her satchel clutched tightly against her. The mounted man, Nathaniel Cooper, dismounted. In one fluid motion, he was taller than she'd realized, broad-shouldered and imposing. His dark eyes studied her from above his bandana, and though she couldn't see his full face, she sensed something unexpected in his gaze, curiosity rather than malice. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Rebecca Mitchell," she answered, seeing no benefit in lying. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition? Impossible. She'd been careful to cover her tracks when she'd left Riverford. He reached for her satchel, and Becca's grip tightened instinctively. The movement caused her locket to slip from beneath her collar, catching the autumn sunlight. Cooper's eyes fixed on it immediately. "That's an unusual piece," he remarked, reaching toward it. Becca stepped back sharply. "Family heirloom," she said curtly. "Worthless to anyone but me." Cooper studied her for a long moment, then turned to his men. "Change of plans. The lady's coming with us." Panic surged through Becca. "I need to reach Riverford by nightfall. My brother—" "Your brother will have to wait," Cooper interrupted. He turned to the oldest member of his gang, a weathered man with sharp eyes. "Sam, make sure the driver's wound isn't fatal. Ezra, get the horses moving." Again, once we're clear, he addressed the passengers, who watched in horrified silence. "You folks continue to Riverford. Tell Sheriff Grant whatever you like, but the lady chose to come with us. Understood?" The businessman nodded frantically. The elderly couple clung to each other. Cooper turned back to Becca. "You'll ride with me, Miss Mitchell." Becca's mind raced. 5 armed men against her single derringer. The odds weren't in her favor, and she couldn't risk being killed before reaching Jacob. Perhaps if she complied now, an opportunity for escape would present itself later. Cooper extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Becca took it, allowing him to help her onto his horse before he mounted behind her. As they rode away from the stagecoach, Becca felt Cooper's presence at her back, solid and unnervingly calm. Her satchel remained in her lap, the derringer still hidden inside. She watched the stagecoach shrink into the distance, taking with it her plans of a quiet reunion with her ailing brother. Whatever Nathaniel Cooper wanted from her, she doubted it was merely the modest valuables she carried. The question that troubled her most was how much he knew or suspected about who she really was. The Cooper gang rode hard through forests of pine and aspen, the trees a blur of green and gold. Becca's back ached from the punishing pace, but she remained silent, conserving her energy and studying her surroundings. They were heading northeast, away from Riverford, into increasingly rugged terrain. After what felt like hours, they veered onto a narrow trail, barely visible among the underbrush. The path climbed steadily, winding through dense forest until it opened onto a plateau nestled between towering cliffs. Crescent Ridge. Becca had heard whispers of the Cooper gang's hideout, but few who weren't members of the gang had ever seen it. A collection of cabins surrounded a central clearing, with a larger structure that appeared to be a former hunting lodge at the center. Men and women moved about the camp, pausing to watch as the riders returned. This wasn't just a hideout for a few outlaws, Becca realized. It was a small community. Cooper dismounted and offered his hand to help her down. When Becca hesitated, he said quietly, "You can try to run, but there's nowhere to go up here unless you know the trails. The drop on 3 sides is over 100 feet. Reluctantly, Becca accepted his assistance, her legs stiff as they touched the ground. Cooper removed his bandana, revealing his full face for the first time. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw and features that might have been handsome if not for the scar that ran from his left temple to the corner of his mouth. His eyes, she now saw clearly, were an unusual shade of green, observant and intelligent. "Marcus," Cooper called to his right-hand man who was dismounting nearby. "Take Miss Mitchell to the lodge. Give her the room at the end of the hall. Make sure she's comfortable, but watched." Marcus nodded. though his expression suggested he disapproved of bringing a captive to their sanctuary. He gestured for Becca to follow him, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered gun. Becca clutched her satchel and obeyed, her mind already mapping the layout of the camp, noting potential escape routes despite Cooper's warning about the cliffs. The lodge was surprisingly well appointed inside, with solid furniture, rugs covering the plank floors, and oil lamps casting a warm glow. Marcus led her down a hallway to a small but clean room containing a bed, a washstand, and a chair beside a window that overlooked the steep drop Cooper had mentioned. "Someone will bring you food," Marcus said gruffly. "Don't try anything stupid, there's always someone watching." He closed the door behind him, and Becca heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock. Alone at last, Becca sank onto the bed, exhaustion washing over her. She opened her satchel, checking that her few belongings, including the derringer, remained undisturbed. Then she removed the locket from around her neck and opened the tiny hidden catch that only she knew existed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Inside was not a portrait as one might expect, but a small folded paper with numbers written in a precise hand. She memorized the sequence once more, though she'd committed it to memory years ago, then returned the paper to its hiding place and the locket to her neck. Whatever Nathaniel Cooper wanted from her, she had something more valuable to protect than her life. Her brother's life and the lives of others depended on her reaching Dr. Sullivan with the information she carried. As the sun began to set beyond her window, casting long shadows across Crescent Ridge, Becca knew one thing with certainty. She couldn't afford to remain a captive for long. When the door to her room finally opened again, Becca had composed herself, settling on a strategy of cautious cooperation while she assessed her situation. To her surprise, it was Cooper himself who entered, carrying a tray of food. The aroma of stew made her stomach growl, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since early morning. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "It's venison stew, nothing fancy, but it's hot." Becca remained seated on the bed, watching him warily. "Why am I here, Mr. Cooper? I'm not wealthy. I have no family to pay a ransom." "No family?" Cooper raised an eyebrow. "Yet you mentioned a brother in Riverford." Becca silently cursed her earlier slip. An estranged brother who's ill and likely poor, hardly a source of ransom money. Cooper pulled the chair away from the table and sat, studying her with those penetrating green eyes. "I didn't bring you here for ransom, Miss Mitchell." "Then why?" Instead of answering, Cooper reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded newspaper clipping yellowed with age. He handed it to Becca. Her blood ran cold as she stared at the headline, "Riverford Bank Clerk's Daughter Missing, Foul Play Suspected." Beneath it was a sketch of her younger self. "This is from 3 years ago," Cooper said quietly. "The story caught my interest because of certain details that weren't in the official account. The bank was robbed the same night you disappeared. The safe wasn't merely opened, it was unlocked, suggesting someone with knowledge of the combination. Your father was the only person besides the bank owner who had that information." Becca carefully kept her expression neutral as she handed the clipping back. "And you think I had something to do with it?" "I think there's more to the story than a simple robbery and a coincidental disappearance." Cooper tucked the clipping away. "The interesting thing is, 2 days before you vanished, I had my own plans to rob that very bank. I called it off because someone else got there first." "If you're looking for the money, I don't have it," Becca said evenly. Cooper smiled slightly. "If I were only interested in money, I'd have taken your locket and let you continue on your journey. No, Miss Mitchell, what intrigues me is why the respectable daughter of Riverford's bank clerk would vanish the same night as $20,000, only to return 3 years later traveling alone on a stagecoach. Becca stood and walked to the window, buying herself a moment to think. The sun had nearly set, bathing Crescent Ridge in golden light. Below, she could see members of Cooper's gang going about their evening routines, tending horses, preparing meals, talking in small groups. It looked disconcertingly normal, like any small frontier community. She turned back to face Cooper. "My brother is dying," she said flatly. "That's the only reason I'm returning to Riverford. Whatever theories you have about me are your business, but I need to see him before it's too late." Cooper studied her, his expression unreadable. "We'll reach an arrangement, Miss Mitchell. Eat your dinner, rest. We'll talk more tomorrow." He stood and moved toward the door, then paused. "The stew will get cold." After he left, Becca heard the key turn in the lock again. She approached the tray of food cautiously, her stomach growling despite her suspicion. The stew smelled delicious, and a piece of cornbread sat beside it, still warm. She ate slowly, her mind working through possibilities. Cooper knew something about her past, perhaps more than he was letting on. Yet he hadn't threatened her or demanded information. His interest seemed more personal than practical, which made him unpredictable. As night fell over Crescent Ridge, Becca finished her meal and explored her room more thoroughly. The window was her most obvious escape route, but Cooper hadn't exaggerated about the drop. Without a rope, it would be suicide. The door was solid, the lock substantial. She was effectively trapped, at least for now. She sat on the edge of the bed, turning her locket between her fingers. 3 years ago, she'd made a choice that had changed everything. Now, circumstances were forcing her hand again. As moonlight spilled through her window, Becca made her decision. If Cooper wanted answers, perhaps she could provide enough to secure her freedom without revealing the truth that mattered most. The real reason she carried the numbers hidden in her locket, and why she needed to reach Dr. Sullivan before it was too late. In the quiet of the night, Becca finally allowed herself to think of Jacob. Was he truly dying, as Sullivan's letter claimed, or was it a ruse to draw her back to Riverford? Either way, time was slipping away, and with each passing hour, the delicate plans she'd set in motion 3 years ago came closer to unraveling. She needed to escape Crescent Ridge, but first, she needed to understand exactly what Nathaniel Cooper knew, and what he wanted from her. Becca woke to sunlight streaming through her window. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. The unfamiliar room, the rough blanket, the distant sounds of activity outside. Then reality crashed back. Crescent Ridge, the Cooper gang, her captivity. She sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair. Someone had slipped into her room while she slept, leaving a basin of clean water, a small towel, and, remarkably, her own hairbrush, which must have been taken from her satchel. The gesture was unexpectedly considerate for outlaws holding her against her will. After washing her face and arranging her hair as best she could, Becca inspected her room once more in the clear morning light. The window remained her most obvious means of escape, despite the deadly drop beyond it. The pine trees below swayed in the mountain breeze, their uppermost branches still well out of reach from her perch. The door was her only realistic option, but that would require getting past whoever stood guard. As if summoned by her thoughts, a soft knock came at the door. Before Becca could respond, the lock turned and a young man entered, carrying another tray. He couldn't have been more than 20, with sandy hair and a boyish face that looked ill-suited to the life of an outlaw. "Brought you breakfast, ma'am," he said, setting the tray on the small table. "Mr. Cooper says you're to join him after. You've eaten." The young man lingered awkwardly, as if unsure whether to say more. "Thank you," Becca said cautiously. "And you are?" "Oliver Bennett, ma'am. Most folks call me Ollie." He gave a slight nod that was almost a bow. Becca couldn't help but smile at his unexpected politeness. "Well, thank you, Ollie. Will you be the one escorting me to Mr. Cooper?" Ollie nodded, seeming pleased at being addressed by name. "Yes, ma'am, whenever you're ready." Becca gestured to the chair. "Would you mind waiting while I eat? I'd appreciate the company, and I have a few questions about Crescent Ridge." Uncertainty flickered across Ollie's face. "Mr. Cooper didn't say I couldn't talk to you, just that I should bring you to him after breakfast." He sat gingerly on the edge of the chair, hands resting on his knees, looking like a schoolboy called to the headmaster's office. "How long have you been with the Cooper gang, Ollie?" Becca asked, taking a seat on the bed and reaching for a piece of the cornbread on her breakfast tray. "2 years now," he replied. "Mr. Cooper found me after my pa died. I was trying to rob a general store in Whispering Pines, making a real mess of it, to tell the truth. Instead of turning me in, he brought me here." Becca noted the admiration in Ollie's voice when he spoke of Cooper. "He seems to inspire loyalty in his people." Ollie nodded eagerly. "Mr. Cooper's not like other outlaws, ma'am. He has rules. We don't hurt innocent folks if we can help it. We don't rob from people who can't afford the loss." "Noble thieves?" Becca raised an eyebrow skeptically. "I know how it sounds," Ollie said, his cheeks reddening slightly. "But there's more to it than taking what isn't ours. The mining company that owns half the territory, North Star Mining, they've been squeezing folks dry, running small ranches off their land, bringing in hired guns when people resist. Mr. Cooper's been fighting back." Becca's hand paused halfway to her mouth. "North Star Mining," she repeated, the name striking a chord. "They're based in Riverford?" "Yes, ma'am. Their main office is there, though their owner, Mr. Harrison, spends most of his time in Denver these days." Ollie leaned forward slightly. "If you don't mind my asking, what business do you have in Riverford? Mr. Cooper doesn't usually bring folks back to Crescent Ridge, especially not ladies." Becca chose her words carefully. "Family matters. My brother is ill." "I'm sorry to hear that, ma'am." Ollie's expression was genuinely sympathetic. "Is he at Sullivan's place? Dr. Sullivan's the best physician in the territory." "You know Dr. Sullivan?" Becca couldn't mask her surprise. Ollie nodded. "He's patched up more than a few of us over the years. Never asks questions about bullet wounds or knife cuts, just does what needs doing. Mr. Cooper trusts him." This was unexpected information. If Sullivan had connections to the Cooper gang, why hadn't he mentioned it in his letter? And what did that mean for Jacob? Before Becca could ponder this further, a knock at the door announced Marcus, Cooper's right-hand man. "Cooper's waiting," he said curtly to Ollie, who scrambled to his feet. "Yes, sir, Mr. Reynolds. Just giving Miss Mitchell time to finish her breakfast." Marcus gave Becca an appraising look. 5 minutes, he said, then closed the door again. "He doesn't seem to share your admiration for me being here," Becca observed. Ollie shrugged. "Mr. Reynolds has been with Mr. Cooper since the beginning. He's protective is all." He hesitated, then added, "You should know, ma'am, if you're hoping folks in Riverford might come looking for you, they won't find Crescent Ridge. The trail we took yesterday is just one of many, and they all look like dead ends unless you know exactly where to turn." Becca finished the last of her breakfast. "Thank you for the information, Ollie. I'm ready to see Mr. Cooper now." The young outlaw led her from the room, and Becca took the opportunity to study the lodge more carefully in daylight. The main hall was larger than she'd realized, with a stone fireplace at one end and several doorways leading to other rooms. Morning light streamed through windows, illuminating the surprisingly comfortable furnishings, sturdy tables, chairs with cushions, even bookshelves along one wall. This wasn't the crude hideout she'd expected from notorious outlaws. Ollie led her to a door at the far end of the hall and knocked. Cooper's voice called for them to enter. Inside was what appeared to be a study, with maps spread across a large desk and more books lining the walls. Cooper stood by the window, dressed more formally than the previous evening in a white shirt, dark vest, and trousers that wouldn't have looked out of place in a Riverford business establishment. Only the Pistol holstered at his hip served as a reminder of his true occupation. "Thank you, Ollie," Cooper said. "That will be all for now." After Ollie departed, Cooper gestured to a chair opposite his desk. "I trust you slept well, Miss Mitchell?" "As well as can be expected while being held captive," Becca replied, remaining standing. "I appreciate the breakfast, but I'd rather discuss when I can leave." Your brother Jacob," Cooper interrupted, moving to sit behind his desk. "Currently under Dr. Sullivan's care for consumption, if my information is correct." Becca tensed. "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know what happens in this territory, especially in Riverford." Cooper leaned back in his chair. "Please, sit. This conversation will be easier if we're both comfortable." Reluctantly, Becca took the offered seat, her eyes drawn to the maps spread across the desk. They showed the territory in detailed relief: mountains, rivers, towns, and trails, some marked with notations she couldn't decipher from her angle. "You're planning something," she observed. A slight smile crossed Cooper's face. "I'm always planning something, Miss Mitchell. The question is whether you might have information that could assist my current venture. I've been gone from Riverford for 3 years. Whatever information I had is likely outdated. Perhaps." Cooper studied her with those penetrating green eyes. "But your return timing is interesting. 3 weeks after Catherine Walsh becomes the majority shareholder of North Star Mining, you suddenly reappear." Becca felt a chill run through her. "I don't know who Catherine Walsh is." "The widow of Gregory Walsh, who died rather suddenly 6 months ago. He was North Star's previous owner and a close associate of Edward Harrison, the company president." Cooper watched her reaction closely. Mrs. Walsh inherited her husband's controlling interest in the company. Since then, she's been making changes that have Harrison and his supporters concerned. "This has nothing to do with me," Becca insisted. "I returned because of my brother's illness, nothing more." Cooper reached into a drawer and withdrew a folded paper, which he slid across the desk to her. Becca recognized it immediately. It was identical to the letter from Dr. Sullivan that had brought her back to Wyoming territory. Her hand instinctively went to her satchel, where her copy resided. "How did you get this?" she demanded. "Sullivan sent 2 letters," Cooper explained. "One directly to your last known address in Denver, and one to an associate who might know how to reach you. That associate works for me." Becca's mind raced. If Cooper had connections to Sullivan, and Sullivan had connections to Jacob, then the web was far more tangled than she'd realized. "Are you saying my brother's illness is some sort of trap?" "Not a trap," Cooper corrected. "An opportunity for both of us. Your brother is indeed ill, though perhaps not as near death as Sullivan's letter implied. The urgency was to ensure your prompt return." Anger flared in Becca. "You used my brother's condition to lure me back?" "Not I," Cooper said calmly. "Sullivan made that decision independently, but once I learned of your imminent return, I saw an opportunity to intercept you before others might." "Others? What others?" "Edward Harrison, for one." Cooper's expression darkened. "He's been asking questions about Rebecca Mitchell for over a year now, offering rewards for information on your whereabouts, the kind of rewards that make people willing to overlook his other activities." Becca felt the blood drain from her face. If Harrison was looking for her, then he must suspect. "What does North Star Mining have to do with me?" Cooper leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. 3 years ago, $20,000 disappeared from the Riverford Bank. That same night, documents went missing from the North Star Mining offices. Documents that detailed certain arrangements between the company and territorial officials. Bribes, fraudulent land claims, even evidence of deliberately misplaced property deeds. Shortly thereafter, Rebecca Mitchell, daughter of the bank clerk who had access to the vault, vanished without a trace. "You think I took those documents?" "I know you did." Cooper's certainty was unnerving. What I don't know is why, or what you've done with them since, but Harrison is convinced you still have them, or at least you know where they are. That's why he's been hunting for you." Becca stood abruptly, needing to move, to think. She paced toward the window, gazing out at Crescent Ridge. The outlaw camp was fully alive now, with people moving purposefully about their tasks. In the distance, the mountains stretched endlessly, offering the illusion of freedom. "If what you're saying is true," she said finally, turning back to Cooper, "then returning to Riverford puts me in danger." "Considerable danger," Cooper agreed, "which is why I arranged our meeting on the trail, rather than letting you arrive unprotected." Becca studied him skeptically. "You expect me to believe you intercepted the stagecoach out of concern for my welfare?" "I intercepted the stagecoach because you possess information I need," Cooper said plainly. "But keeping you alive and out of Harrison's hands serves both our interests." "And what exactly is your interest, Mr. Cooper? What do you want from me?" Cooper rose and moved to a cabinet against the wall. He unlocked it with a key from his vest pocket and withdrew a folder, which he placed on the desk. North Star Mining has been systematically destroying this territory for years, driving out small ranchers, exploiting miners, contaminating water sources with their operations. They maintain their power through corruption and intimidation. I've been fighting them the only way I know how, disrupting their shipments, raiding their payrolls, making their operation costly. "Noble thieves," Becca murmured, echoing her earlier words to Ollie. Cooper's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Hardly noble, but purposeful." He opened the folder, revealing more maps and documents. 3 weeks ago, Catherine Walsh hired new security for all North Star facilities, men who don't answer to Harrison. 2 days ago, she requested a complete audit of all company holdings and transactions for the past 5 years. Tomorrow, she travels from Denver to Riverford for the first time since her husband's death. "You're planning to rob her," Becca concluded. "No," Cooper's voice was firm. "I'm planning to meet with her, to propose an arrangement that could benefit us both and the territory." Becca shook her head, trying to make sense of this revelation. Why would an outlaw want to negotiate with the owner of the company he's been robbing? Because Mrs. Walsh may be an ally, not an enemy. Cooper tapped the documents before him. Her husband kept her isolated from the business, but since his death, she's been asking questions, the kind that make Harrison nervous. If she truly wants to reform North Star's practices, I can help her identify the corruption. But I need leverage. "The missing documents," Becca said quietly. Cooper nodded. "If they still exist, they could provide the evidence needed to oust Harrison and his conspirators once and for all." Becca returned to her chair, her mind working rapidly. Cooper's explanation aligned with too many facts to be a fabrication. Yet trusting an outlaw remained a dangerous proposition. "Even if I knew anything about these documents, why would I help you? What do I gain?" "Your brother's safety, for one thing," Cooper said bluntly. "As long as Harrison remains in power, Jacob remains vulnerable. Sullivan can only protect him to a point." "And if I refuse?" Cooper's expression remained neutral. "Then I'll escort you to Riverford myself to see your brother. But without the evidence those documents provide, I can't guarantee what happens after that. Harrison has the sheriff in his pocket, along with most territorial officials. If he believes you have information that threatens him, he'll find a way to get to you, and to Jacob." Becca fell silent, weighing her options. The locket around. Her neck seemed to grow heavier, the hidden numbers it contained burning in her mind. After a long moment, she met Cooper's gaze directly. "I need to speak with Dr. Sullivan and see my brother before I make any decisions." Cooper studied her, seemingly searching for deception. Finding none, he nodded. "Fair enough. I'll arrange for you to visit them, but not alone. It's too dangerous for you to be seen openly in Riverford. When, 2 days from now, Sullivan brings supplies to Whispering Pines monthly, a mining settlement that's fallen on hard times since North Star diverted the creek they relied on. He's due there the day after tomorrow. I'll have Ollie and Sam escort you to meet him. And in the meantime, I remain your prisoner here at Crescent Ridge, Becca concluded. My guest, Cooper corrected, rising from his desk. You'll have freedom to move about the camp, though I'd advise against trying the trails without a guide. They're treacherous even for those who know them, and fatal for those who don't. Becca stood as well, detecting the dismissal in his tone. One last question, Mr. Cooper. You mentioned that 3 years ago you had plans to rob the Riverford bank yourself, but someone beat you to it. If that's true, why didn't you pursue the thief then? $20,000 would have been worth tracking down. Wuto Cooper's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. At the time, I had more pressing concerns than a rival thief. North Star had just driven my family from their ranch, land my grandfather had settled 30 years earlier. My father died, defending it. The money became secondary to making Harrison pay for what he'd done. The personal vendetta explained much about Cooper's fixation on North Star. I'm sorry about your father, Becca said quietly, as I am about your brother's illness. Cooper moved to the door. Ollie will show you around the camp. I have matters to attend to in preparation for Mrs. Walsh's arrival, but we'll speak again this evening. As Cooper opened the door, Becca saw Ollie waiting expectantly in the hall. Before she left, she turned back. Mr. Cooper, you never actually answered my question about why you're interested in me specifically. The documents and money disappeared 3 years ago. Why focus on finding me now? Cooper's green eyes held hers steadily. Because 3 years ago, Rebecca Mitchell vanished completely. No trace, no trail. Only someone remarkably clever or with inside help could disappear so thoroughly. Yet here you are, returning of your own accord despite the risk. That suggests you have a plan, and I want to know what it is. With that unsettling observation, he closed the door, leaving Becca to follow Ollie into the hall. Her mind whirled. With new information and possibilities, Cooper knew far more than she'd anticipated, yet still not the whole truth. The real question was how much she could risk telling him, and how much she needed to keep hidden, not just for her own safety, but for Jacob's, and for the success of the plan she'd set in motion 3 years earlier. Ollie's cheerful voice broke into her thoughts. Mr. Cooper said I should show you around Crescent Ridge, ma'am. Would you like to see the stables first? We've got some fine horses. Becca smiled despite herself at the young man's enthusiasm. Lead the way, Ollie. And perhaps while we walk, you could tell me more about Mrs. Catherine Walsh and her connection to North Star mining. As they stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, Becca discreetly touched the locket at her throat, reassuring herself that its secret remained secure. Whatever game Cooper was playing, she had her own moves to make, and her next one would be at Whispering Pines, when she finally spoke with Dr. Sullivan. Until then, she would watch, listen, and prepare. Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold as Becca made her final preparations for the journey to Whispering Pines. She fastened the leather satchel containing her few possessions, tucking the locket safely beneath her shirt where it rested against her skin. The conversation at dinner the previous night had revealed both more and less than she'd anticipated. Diana Fletcher had proven herself to be formidably intelligent, with an intimate knowledge of North Star Mining's operations that could only have come from dedicated surveillance. Marcus remained skeptical of Becca's involvement, repeatedly questioning the wisdom of allowing her to meet with Sullivan. Only Sam had maintained his taciturn neutrality, offering terse observations about trail conditions and the best routes to avoid Harrison's men. Throughout the meal, Cooper had navigated the varying opinions with the diplomatic skill of a seasoned politician rather than an outlaw. Reassuring Marcus without dismissing his concerns, acknowledging Diana's strategic insights and ultimately maintaining his decision that Becca would go to Whispering Pines as planned. What had surprised Becca most, however, was the revelation that Catherine Walsh's arrival in Riverford coincided with a scheduled meeting of North Star's board of directors, a meeting at which significant changes to the company's leadership would be proposed. According to Diana's intelligence, Walsh intended to replace Harrison as president, citing financial irregularities and mismanagement. If Walsh succeeds in ousting Harrison, Diana had explained, it creates an opportunity we can't afford to miss. A new leadership might be persuaded to address the water rights issues and land claims that have caused so much suffering. Or the new boss might be worse than the old one, Marcus had countered. Walsh married into mining money. What makes you think she's any different from the rest of them? Her actions since taking control of her husband's shares, Cooper had replied. She's already replaced security personnel loyal to Harrison, initiated an external audit, and reached out to several ranchers whose land was seized under questionable circumstances. The implications of this information had occupied Becca's thoughts throughout the night. If Walsh truly intended to reform North Star Mining, the documents hidden according to the numbers in Becca's locket might serve a greater purpose than merely proving Harrison's corruption. They could help secure lasting changes that would benefit the entire territory. A knock at her door interrupted Becca's reflections. Ollie stood outside, his expression a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Horses are saddled and ready, Miss Mitchell. Sam says we need to leave while the mist still covers the lower trails." Becca nodded, gathering her satchel and following Ollie to the stables. Sam waited with 3 horses, Willow for Becca, his own mount, and a sturdy roan for Ollie. Cooper stood nearby, speaking quietly with Diana. When he saw Becca approach, he moved to meet her. "Remember," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "Sullivan will have news of your brother, but Harrison's men may be watching. Keep your interaction brief. Get the information you need, and return with Sam and Ollie immediately." "And if I decide not to return?" Becca challenged. Cooper's green eyes held hers steadily. "Then you place yourself and your brother at risk. Harrison won't stop hunting you simply because you've eluded me. Perhaps I'll take my chances." "Your choice," Cooper replied with a slight shrug. "But consider this. I've offered protection and a potential alliance against a common enemy. Harrison will offer neither." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small folded paper which he pressed into her hand. "Give this to Sullivan. It confirms my instructions regarding your brother's care." Becca pocketed the note, suspicion, warring with grudging appreciation for Cooper's apparent concern for Jacob. "You seem very invested in my family's welfare for a man who makes his living as a thief." "We all have our motivations, Miss Mitchell." A faint smile crossed his face. "Safe journey. I'll expect your return by nightfall." With that, he stepped back, allowing Sam to help Becca mount Willow. The mare nickered softly, seemingly eager for the journey ahead. As the small party rode away from Crescent Ridge, Becca felt Cooper's gaze following them until the trail curved and the camp disappeared from view. Sam led them down a different path than they had taken the previous day, steeper and less well-marked, but offering more cover from potential observers. The morning mist clung to the mountainside, transforming the forest into a dreamlike landscape of ghostly trees and muffled sounds. For nearly an hour, they descended in silence, the only conversation Sam's occasional warnings about difficult sections of trail. When they finally reached the valley floor, the sun had burned away much of the mist, revealing a landscape of rolling foothills leading toward distant plains. Sam set a brisk pace, keeping to the tree line rather than using the more direct open route visible to the east. "Longer this way," he explained when Becca questioned the direction, "but less exposed. Harrison's men patrol the main trails regularly. They're looking for Cooper's riders, but they'd certainly take interest in a woman traveling with us." Throughout the morning, Sam demonstrated the skills that made him valuable as Cooper's scout. He read the landscape with almost supernatural acuity, identifying signs of recent passage that Becca would have overlooked entirely. A broken twig, hoofprints partially obscured by fallen leaves, the distinctive pattern of a horseshoe known to be used by North Star's security men. At midday, they paused to rest the horses near a small stream. While Ollie prepared a simple meal of jerky, hard bread, and dried apples, Sam disappeared briefly into the forest, returning with fresh berries that added welcome sweetness to their provisions. "You seem very familiar with these woods," Becca observed as they ate. Sam nodded, his weathered face revealing little. "Trapped here before the mining companies came? Knew every valley and ridge from the Tetons to the Black Hills." A shadow crossed his expression. "Land was clean then, streams ran clear. Now North Star poisons the water with their operations, cuts down forests for mine timbers, drives away. Game with blasting. Yet you work with Cooper, who robs and steals," Becca pointed out. "Cooper takes from those who've already taken too much," Sam replied. "And he gives back to those who've lost everything." He fixed Becca with a penetrating stare. "You took something too, if Cooper's right about those missing documents. Question is, what do you plan to do with them?" Before Becca could formulate a response, Ollie interrupted excitedly. "Look!" He pointed to a large bird circling overhead. "Golden eagle. That's good luck, Sam always says." Sam glanced upward, a rare smile briefly softening his stern features. "Means we're being watched over," he agreed. "Time to move." Still, have ground to cover before Whispering Pines. They continued their journey through increasingly open country. The forest gradually thinned, giving way to scattered stands of trees interspersed with meadows, where the season's last wildflowers added touches of color to the golden autumn grass. By mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge that overlooked their destination. Whispering Pines looked less like a proper town than a collection of weathered buildings clustered around what had once been a promising mine. A tall head frame, the structure supporting the hoist for the mine shaft, stood as a stark reminder of more prosperous times. Several houses, a dilapidated general store, and what appeared to be a small church completed the settlement. Thin trails of smoke rose from only a handful of chimneys, suggesting that many of the buildings stood empty. "Used to be 300 people here," Sam said, following Becca's gaze. "When North Star diverted Silver Creek, the local mine couldn't process ore efficiently anymore. Most folks left. Those who stay either can't afford to leave or are too stubborn to give Harrison the satisfaction." "Where will we meet Sullivan?" Becca asked, studying the town for signs of activity. "The church," Sam replied. "It serves as meeting hall, school, and clinic when Sullivan visits. He should have arrived this morning." They approached Whispering Pines cautiously, Sam leading them on a circuitous route that kept them hidden until they reached the back of the church. A wagon stood nearby, a tired-looking horse still in its traces, evidence of Sullivan's presence. Sam signaled for them to dismount, then tied their horses in a small copse of trees where they wouldn't be immediately visible from the main street. "Ollie, keep watch," Sam instructed. "Anyone approaches who isn't Sullivan, you whistle twice." "Sharp." "Yes, sir," Ollie replied with obvious pride at being trusted with such an important task. Sam led Becca to the church's rear entrance. He knocked in a distinctive pattern, 3 quick raps, followed by 2 slower ones. After a brief pause, the door opened to reveal a man in his 60s with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Sam," he greeted with a nod, then turned his attention to Becca. "Miss Mitchell, I've been expecting you." He stepped aside to allow them entry. "Come in, quickly." The interior of the church was dimly lit, sunlight filtering through dusty windows to illuminate worn pews and a simple altar. To one side, several tables had been arranged with medical supplies and bottles of medication. Sullivan's temporary clinic. "You have a patient waiting?" Sam asked, gesturing to the prepared space. Sullivan nodded. "Mrs. Evans's youngest, fever and cough. She's bringing him shortly." He turned to Becca, studying her with a physician's assessing eye. "You look well, considering your journey. Cooper's men treated you appropriately?" "Well enough," Becca replied guardedly, "though I would have preferred to reach Riverford as planned." Sullivan sighed, removing his spectacles to polish them with a handkerchief. "Riverford would have been dangerous for you, Miss Mitchell. Harrison has men watching all approaches to town, and specifically monitoring my clinic. Your brother's presence there has attracted unwelcome attention." "Is Jacob truly ill?" Becca demanded. "Or was that merely a ruse to draw me back?" "He suffers from consumption, as I wrote," Sullivan confirmed, his expression grave. "His condition is serious, but stable for now. The treatments are helping, though a complete recovery is uncertain." Relief and concern washed through Becca in equal measure. At least that part of Sullivan's letter had been truthful. "When can I see him?" "Not yet," Sullivan said firmly. "Harrison's men watch my clinic day and night. They don't know you've returned to the territory, but they suspect. Jacob might know your whereabouts. If you appeared suddenly, they would certainly report it to Harrison immediately. So I'm to rely on second-hand reports of my brother's condition while hiding in an outlaw camp?" Becca's frustration sharpened her tone. "Only temporarily," Sullivan assured her. "Events are in motion that may change circumstances dramatically within days." He glanced at Sam. "I assume Cooper has shared information about Catherine Walsh's arrival." Sam nodded. "Diana's been tracking preparations at North Star's offices. Security's been doubled. With new men," Sullivan added. "Men loyal to Mrs. Walsh, not Harrison." He turned back to Becca. "This power struggle within North Star creates an opportunity, but timing is critical. Harrison suspects something is missing, documents that could prove his corruption, but he doesn't know where they are. And you do?" Becca challenged, her hand instinctively moving to where the locket lay hidden beneath her shirt. Sullivan's gaze followed the gesture, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Not their location, no. But I know they exist. And I know they're connected to you somehow." He hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. "Your father entrusted me with certain information before his death. Not specifics, but enough to understand the importance of what was taken that night." Becca stiffened. "My father died of heart failure 6 months before I left Riverford." "Yes," Sullivan agreed. "But he anticipated trouble. He knew what Harrison was capable of, had seen the consequences of crossing North Star mining. Your father was a cautious man, Miss Mitchell. He left contingency plans." This revelation sent Becca's thoughts spinning. Her father had always been meticulous, detail-oriented. It was what had made him valuable as the bank's clerk. But she'd never suspected he might have prepared for the worst, might have confided in someone like Sullivan. "What exactly did my father tell you?" she asked carefully. "That if anything happened to him, I should watch over you and Jacob, that you might someday need to act decisively to protect yourselves and others harmed by North Star." Sullivan's expression was solemn. "When you disappeared the same night, as the bank robbery and the missing documents, I suspected your father's warnings had proven prescient." Becca turned away, moving to the church window that overlooked the deserted street of Whispering Pines. The failing town was just one example of the damage Harrison and North Star had inflicted on the territory. How many other communities had suffered similar fates? How many families had been displaced, livelihoods destroyed? "Cooper gave me a note for you," she said finally, withdrawing the folded paper from her pocket. Sullivan read it quickly, nodding as if it confirmed something he already knew. "Cooper wants me to prepare for Jacob's relocation," he explained. "Once Mrs. Walsh makes her move against Harrison, the clinic may no longer be safe for your brother." "Relocation where?" Becca asked sharply. Crescent Ridge initially, Sullivan replied. It's defensible remote, and Harrison's men have never found it, despite years of searching. From there, once Jacob is stronger, perhaps Denver, or even further east. Sam, who had been standing silently by the door, spoke up. Time's passing. Need to be back on the trail before sunset. Sullivan nodded. He's right. You shouldn't linger here. He reached into his medical bag and withdrew a sealed envelope. For your brother. I've told him you're back in the territory, though not the circumstances of your detour. Becca accepted the envelope, touched by the unexpected opportunity to communicate with Jacob, however indirectly. Thank you. There's something else. You should know, Sullivan added, his voice dropping further. Harrison isn't the only one interested in those missing documents. There's a federal marshal in the territory, Abraham Townsend. He's been asking questions about bank robberies and North Star's business practices, discreetly but persistently. A lawman? Sam's expression darkened. Cooper needs to know this. Indeed, Sullivan agreed. Townsend isn't like the local authorities Harrison controls. He answers to Washington, not territorial officials. If he's investigating North Star, it suggests the corruption may have drawn federal attention. This new information added another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. Federal involvement could change everything, potentially for better or worse. When is Mrs. Walsh expected to arrive in Riverford? Becca asked. Tomorrow, Sullivan replied. The board meeting is scheduled for the day after. Harrison still believes he controls enough votes to maintain his position, but Mrs. Walsh has been persuasive with several key shareholders. The outcome remains uncertain. A sharp, two-note whistle from outside interrupted their conversation, Ollie's warning signal. Sam moved immediately to the window, peering cautiously around the frame. Riders, he reported tensely. 4 of them, coming up the main street, North Star men, judging by the gear. Sullivan's expression tightened with concern. They shouldn't be here. North Star abandoned their interests in Whispering Pines months ago. Unless they're looking for someone, Sam suggested grimly, turning to Becca. We need to go. Now. The back door leads to a path through the old cemetery, Sullivan said urgently. It will give you cover to reach your horses without being seen from the street. What about you? Becca asked. Won't your presence here raise questions? I'm the territory's only doctor, Sullivan replied with confidence that didn't quite reach his eyes. My visits to outlying settlements are expected and unremarkable. I'll claim I'm treating Mrs. Evans's child, as planned. Sam was already ushering Becca toward the door. No time for more talk. Move. The path through the cemetery was overgrown, with weeds and largely hidden from view by weathered headstones and untrimmed bushes. They moved quickly but carefully, keeping low. When they reached the trees where Ollie waited with the horses, the young outlaw's face was tight with tension. 4 men, he whispered, confirming Sam's count. They've stopped at the general store asking questions. One of them is Garrett, Harrison's head of security. Sam cursed under his breath. Garrett doesn't leave Riverford unless something important is happening. Someone must have told them about Sullivan's regular visits here. Or they followed Sullivan from Riverford, Becca suggested. Possible, Sam acknowledged. Either way, we need to leave by a different route than we came. They'll have men watching the main trails. They mounted swiftly, Sam leading them away from Whispering Pines through a shallow gulch that provided cover from observation. Once they were a safe distance from the settlement, he set a punishing pace, pushing their horses hard until they reached the tree line of the forest several miles distant. We'll have to take the high pass, Sam announced as they paused to let the horses catch their breath. It's dangerous this time of year. Narrow trails, loose rock, but Harrison's men won't expect anyone to attempt it. How dangerous? Becca asked, patting Willow's neck soothingly. Lost 2 men there last spring, Sam replied bluntly. Rockslide took them right off the trail. But it's that or risk running straight into Garrett's patrol on the lower paths. I can handle it, Becca said with more confidence than she felt. After witnessing Sam's skill in the wilderness, she trusted his judgment about their route, however dangerous it might be. The high pass proved every bit as treacherous as Sam had warned. The trail, little more than a game path in places, wound along cliff faces and through narrow defiles, where a single misstep could mean disaster. Twice they were forced to dismount and lead the horses across particularly hazardous stretches. Willow, bless her steady temperament, followed Becca's guidance without hesitation, even when the path crumbled slightly beneath her hooves. The sun was low in the sky by the time they reached safer ground, casting long shadows across the mountainside. Sam pushed them onward, clearly intent on reaching Crescent Ridge before full dark descended. Becca's muscles ached from the tense, demanding ride, but she kept pace without complaint. The information from Sullivan about her father's foresight, Jacob's condition, the federal marshal, and Catherine Walsh's imminent confrontation with Harrison occupied her thoughts, pieces of a puzzle that was slowly taking shape. Twilight had deepened into dusk when they finally approached the hidden trail leading to Crescent Ridge. Sam raised his hand, signaling a halt. Something's wrong, he said quietly, dismounting and dropping to one knee to examine the ground. What is it? Ollie asked, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip. Tracks, Sam replied, pointing to marks Becca could barely discern in the fading light. Fresh. Several horses passed this way within the last hour. Could be our own people, Ollie suggested hopefully. Sam shook his head. Different horseshoes than Cooper's smithy makes, and look here. He indicated a distinctive impression in the soft earth. This horse is shod with North Star's pattern. I'd recognize it anywhere. A chill ran through Becca. Harrison's men found Crescent Ridge. Maybe, Sam admitted, his weathered face grave in the gathering darkness. Or maybe they're still searching and happened upon this trail by chance. He remounted his horse. We proceed with caution. No talking from here on. Follow my lead. Exactly. They continued in tense silence, Sam frequently pausing to study the trail ahead and listen for signs of danger. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet, the usual evening sounds of birds and small creatures absent. When they finally reached the steep path leading up to the plateau where Crescent Ridge stood, Sam insisted they dismount and proceed on foot, leading the horses. Less noise this way, he whispered. If there's trouble ahead, we need to know before we're spotted. They had ascended perhaps halfway when the crack of a distant gunshot echoed across the mountainside. Sam froze, his expression hardening. Another shot followed, then several in rapid succession. Cooper's men defending the camp, he concluded grimly. We have to help them, Ollie exclaimed, his young face flushed with alarm. Sam silenced him with a sharp gesture. Keep your voice down, boy. We don't rush in blind. He turned to Becca. There's a lookout point just ahead. Wait here with the horses while Ollie and I scout the situation. I'm coming with you, Becca insisted. I can help. How? You're not armed, not trained for combat. Neither is Ollie from the looks of him, Becca countered, and I won't sit here alone while Harrison's men attack people who've protected me. Sam studied her for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. Stay behind us. If I signal you to retreat, you do it immediately. No arguments. They secured the horses to a sturdy pine and continued on foot, moving carefully through the underbrush. The gunfire had become sporadic, individual shots rather than volleys, suggesting a standoff rather than an all-out assault. When they reached the lookout point, a rocky outcropping with a clear view of the approach to Crescent Ridge, the scene below confirmed Sam's fears. A group of armed men had established positions along the main trail to the camp, using boulders and trees for cover as they exchanged fire with defenders above. Becca counted at least 8 attackers, all wearing the distinctive duster coats of North Star's security force. The plateau itself remained out of sight from their position, making it impossible to assess the situation within Crescent Ridge itself. "Garrett must have split his forces," Sam murmured. "The men we saw in Whispering Pines were just one group. These came directly here, probably guided by someone who knew the general location." "Do they know about the other trails to the camp?" Becca asked. "Doesn't appear so," Sam replied after studying the attackers' positions. "They're focused on the main approach. That gives us an advantage." He turned to Ollie. "You know the north trail that connects to the back of the camp?" Ollie nodded nervously. "The one along the cliff face?" "Yes, sir." "Take Miss Mitchell that way. Get her safely to Cooper. Tell him what we saw in Whispering Pines. Garrett's presence, everything." "What about you?" Becca asked. Sam checked his rifle. "I'll create a distraction. Make them think they're being flanked. Should buy you enough time to reach the camp undetected." "That's too dangerous," Becca protested. "You'll be outnumbered 8-1. A grim smile crossed Sam's weathered face. "Been in worse spots. Besides, I don't aim to fight them all. Just confuse them long enough for you to get clear." He gripped Ollie's shoulder firmly. "Remember your training, boy. Keep to cover. Move quietly. Protect Miss Mitchell at all costs." "Yes, sir," Ollie replied, his voice steadier than Becca had expected. Sam checked his ammunition one last time, then moved into position among the rocks. "Go now. I'll wait until you've had time to reach the north trail before I start shooting." Becca wanted to object further, but Sam's determined expression made it clear that argument would be futile. Instead, she touched his arm briefly. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank me by getting those documents to Cooper," Sam replied. "Too many people have suffered because of Harrison. Time that changed." Ollie led Becca back to where they'd left the horses, then along a narrow deer trail that curved around the mountainside. Behind them, the first shots from Sam's rifle echoed through the gathering darkness, followed by shouts of alarm from the North Star men below. The distraction was working, at least for now. The North Trail proved even more treacherous than Becca remembered from her ride with Sam the previous day. In the deepening twilight, with only the rising moon to illuminate their path, every step required complete concentration. Ollie moved ahead, sometimes reaching back to guide Willow past particularly difficult sections. The distant sounds of gunfire continued sporadically, punctuated by longer silences that left Becca wondering about Sam's fate. After what seemed an eternity of careful progress along the cliff face, they rounded a final bend to see Crescent Ridge above them. Lights burned in several cabins, and Becca could make out figures moving about the camp, Cooper's people preparing for a potential assault. Ollie let out a low whistle, different from his warning signal earlier, a pattern that would identify them to the sentries. A whistle answered from above, and moments later Diana Fletcher emerged from the shadows, rifle ready. When she recognized them, her tense expression eased slightly. "Ollie, Miss Mitchell, thank God." She helped them secure their horses. "Cooper's been worried sick since we got word of Harrison's men in the area." "Sam stayed behind," Ollie explained, breathlessly. "Creating a diversion so we could get through. The main trail is blocked." Diana's expression darkened. "Damn. That's the second group we've spotted today. 6 men tried the east approach earlier. We drove them back, but they're still out there watching." "Harrison's head of security was in Whispering Pines," Becca added. "They must have followed Sullivan or been tipped off about his regular visits there." "Cooper needs to hear this immediately," Diana said, ushering them toward the main lodge. "He's organizing our defense in case they try a night assault." The lodge was a hive of activity, men and women checking weapons, distributing ammunition, receiving assignments from Cooper, who stood over a large map spread across the central table. He looked up as they entered, relief flashing briefly across his face when he saw Becca. "You made it through," he said, moving quickly to meet them. "Where's Sam?" Ollie explained about the ambush on the main trail and Sam's diversionary tactic. Cooper's expression remained controlled, but Becca saw the concern in his eyes. "Sam knows these mountains better than anyone," he said, as much to reassure himself as the others. "If anyone can outfox Harrison's men, it's him." He turned to Becca. "Did you speak with Sullivan?" "Yes," she confirmed. "He says Jacob's condition is stable but serious. Harrison's men are watching the clinic, and there's more. A federal marshal is in the territory, investigating North Star's activities." Cooper absorbed this news with a thoughtful frown. "Townsend, we've heard rumors about his presence but haven't confirmed it until now." He gestured to the map. "Harrison's making his move sooner than expected. He must be desperate if he's willing to send his men directly against us rather than maintaining the usual patrols." "Mrs. Walsh's arrival tomorrow has him scared," Diana suggested. "If he loses control of North Star, he loses everything, including protection from prosecution for his crimes." "And if he captures me," Becca added quietly, "he recovers the evidence. That could destroy him regardless of who controls the company." Cooper studied her intently. "So you do have the documents?" Becca met his gaze steadily. "I know where they are, and I know what they contain. Enough evidence to send Harrison to prison for decades if it reaches the right hands." A sudden commotion outside interrupted their conversation. Marcus burst through the door, his face tense with urgency. "Riders approaching from the North Trail," he reported. "Two of them moving fast." Cooper grabbed his rifle. "Harrison's men?" "No," Marcus replied, a hint of relief in his voice. "It's Sam, and he's got co-moonlight spilled through the window of Cooper's study, casting long shadows across the tense faces gathered around the worn oak desk." Marshal Townsend stood with his back to the fireplace, his presence transforming what had already been a precarious situation into something far more complex. "What I would do with such documents," Townsend continued, answering Cooper's unfinished question, "is present them to the federal prosecutor in Denver. Combined with the evidence I've already gathered, they would form the basis for a comprehensive case against Harrison and his conspirators." "And Cooper's gang?" Diana asked, the practical question hanging in the charged air. "What happens to them in your vision of justice, Marshal?" Townsend considered her for a moment before responding. "My primary target is North Star Mining and the corruption it has fostered throughout the territorial government. The activities of your organization, while certainly of interest to local authorities, are secondary to my current investigation." "You're offering immunity," Cooper stated flatly, skepticism evident in his voice. "I'm offering prioritization," Townsend corrected. "Once Harrison and his network are dismantled, the territory may find itself with new leadership more inclined toward reasonable negotiations regarding past offenses." Becca studied the marshal carefully, trying to discern whether his proposal represented genuine opportunity or merely a tactical maneuver to gain cooperation. "You've been investigating for 8 months, she observed. "Why haven't you moved against Harrison already if your case is so strong?" "Because proving corruption requires following money trails, and Harrison has been meticulous about concealing his." Townsend's gaze was direct. "The evidence I've gathered establishes patterns of suspicious behavior, but lacks the definitive documentation that would ensure conviction. Without those missing records, which I believe you secured 3 years ago, Harrison might escape with minor charges or none at all." The weight of Becca's decision pressed upon her with renewed intensity. For 3 years, she had protected the evidence her father had secretly accumulated, waiting for the right moment to use it. Now, with Jacob ill and vulnerable, Harrison's men surrounding Crescent Ridge, and Catherine Walsh poised to challenge North Star's leadership, that moment seemed to have arrived. Yet the complications had multiplied beyond anything she had anticipated. "Even if such documents still exist," she said carefully, "delivering them to you would require absolute certainty that Jacob would be protected. Harrison's reach extends throughout the territory. A federal prosecution could take months, even years." "Your brother can be moved to Denver under Marshal Service protection," Townsend offered. "Dr. Sullivan has already indicated he's stable enough for careful transport." Cooper, who had been observing the exchange in thoughtful silence, finally spoke. "You've had communication with Sullivan beyond what we witnessed today." It wasn't a question, but Townsend nodded confirmation. "The doctor has been a valuable source of information regarding North Star's impact on the region's health. Mining. Contamination has caused illness throughout the territory, a federal concern when it affects water crossing multiple jurisdictions." "And you trust him?" Becca pressed, needing to understand the full web of alliances and motivations. "As much as I trust anyone whose interests temporarily align with mine," Townsend replied with the cautious assessment of a career lawman. "Sullivan has demonstrated integrity in his medical practice and genuine concern for those harmed by North Star's operations." A distant gunshot interrupted their conversation, followed by the distinctive pattern of Cooper's sentries signaling an approach from the Western Trail. Cooper moved swiftly to the window, peering into the darkness beyond the camp's perimeter. "Riders," he reported tersely, "two of them moving fast toward the lower gate." Diana joined him at the window, her hand already on her holstered pistol. "Harrison's men." Cooper shook his head. "Too small a group for an attack. Could be messengers from Whispering Pines." He turned to Townsend. "Were you followed, Marshal?" "Not to my knowledge, though Garrett's men are capable trackers." Townsend reached instinctively for the weapon no longer at his hip. The tension in the room heightened as they listened to the approaching hoofbeats growing louder, then the challenges from the sentries, followed by responses too distant to make out clearly. Cooper moved toward the door, signaling Diana to remain with Becca and Townsend. "I'll investigate," he said. "Keep our guests here until I determine what's happening." After Cooper departed, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Diana positioned herself near the door, her vigilance making it clear that neither Becca nor Townsend would leave without her permission. The Marshal seemed unperturbed by his effective captivity, moving to study the maps still spread across Cooper's desk. "Your leader has a remarkable understanding of territorial geography," he observed, tracing the carefully marked trails and settlements. "Military training?" "Self-taught," Diana replied curtly, clearly unwilling to share details about Cooper's background. Becca moved to the window, watching the activity in the camp below. Several armed men had gathered near the western approach, rifles ready but not yet aimed at the newcomers, who remained out of her line of sight. The lack of immediate gunfire suggested whoever had arrived wasn't perceived as an imminent threat. "You've been quiet about your own role in these events, Miss Mitchell," Townsend remarked, turning his attention from the maps. 3 years is a long time to safeguard evidence without acting upon it." "Some situations require patience," Becca replied, unwilling to explain the complex circumstances that had necessitated her prolonged exile. "And others require decisive action," Townsend countered. "Harrison's operation has destroyed lives, poisoned land, corrupted justice. Every month of delay has allowed those harms to continue." The accusation struck a nerve, echoing doubts that had haunted Becca during her years in Denver. "You think I don't know that? You think I haven't carried that burden every day?" Her voice remained low but intense. "My father spent years documenting Harrison's crimes, risking everything to build a case that would be comprehensive enough to bring down not just Harrison, but the entire corrupt system he created. When he died," she stopped abruptly, realizing she had said more than intended. Townsend's expression reflected professional interest, tinged with genuine concern. "When he died," the marshal prompted gently. You continued his work. Becca turned back to the window, composing herself. My father always taught us that justice requires more than good intentions. It requires irrefutable evidence and perfect timing. Moving too soon would have wasted his sacrifice and allowed the guilty to escape consequences. Before Townsend could respond, the study door opened to reveal Cooper, his expression grave but controlled. Sullivan has arrived, he announced. With Jacob. Becca's heart seemed to stop momentarily. My brother is here, how? Harrison's men attacked the clinic in Riverford shortly after Sullivan departed for Whispering Pines, Cooper explained. Jacob was smuggled out by Sullivan's assistant and brought here via the Eastern Trail. It was a desperate measure, but Sullivan felt he had no choice. Is he all right? Becca demanded, already moving toward the door. Cooper stepped aside to let her pass. Weakened by the journey, but his condition is stable. Lucy is settling him in the cabin nearest the lodge. Becca hurried across the camp, barely registering the curious glances from Cooper's people as she passed. The small cabin Cooper had indicated was illuminated by the warm glow of oil lamps. When she pushed open the door, the scene inside momentarily froze her in place. Jacob lay on a narrow bed, his once robust frame now thin and frail beneath. Several blankets. His face was pale, dark shadows beneath his eyes, speaking of prolonged illness, but he was undeniably alive. Dr. Sullivan stood nearby, arranging medical supplies on a small table, while Lucy added another log to the fire burning in the small hearth. Becca? Jacob's voice was weak, but filled with disbelief as he caught sight of her in the doorway. Is it really you? 3 years of separation vanished in an instant as Becca rushed to her brother's side, clasping his thin hand between both of hers. It's me, she confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. I'm here now. Jacob's fingers tightened around hers with surprising strength given his condition. Sullivan said you'd returned, but I hardly dared believe it. After so long... A coughing fit interrupted him, his body shaking with the effort. Sullivan moved swiftly to Jacob's side, supporting him as the cough subsided. Easy, he cautioned. Remember what I said about exertion. When Jacob had settled back against the pillows, his breathing slightly labored but steadier, Sullivan turned to Becca. He needs rest after the journey, but his condition is no worse than it was in Riverford. The fresh mountain air may even prove beneficial once he's recovered from the strain of travel. Thank you for bringing him here, Becca said, genuine gratitude in her voice, despite her lingering suspicion of Sullivan's various allegiances. The doctor's expression sobered. I had no choice. Harrison's men were no longer content with watching the clinic. They intended to take Jacob, use him to force your cooperation once they confirmed you'd returned to the territory. How did they know I was back? Becca asked, looking between Sullivan and Jacob. My fault, Jacob admitted, his voice threaded with regret. I was too excited when Sullivan told me you'd been spotted on the stagecoach. One of the nurses must have overheard. He squeezed her hand weakly. I'm sorry, Becca, after everything you did to stay hidden. It doesn't matter now, she assured him, though the implications of Harrison's knowledge were deeply troubling. We're together again. That's what's important. Lucy approached with a cup of steaming liquid. Willow bark tea with honey, she explained. For the cough and fever, he should drink it while it's hot. As Becca helped Jacob sit up enough to drink, Sullivan moved toward the door. Cooper will want a full report on what happened in Riverford. I'll give you some time with your brother, but we need to discuss next steps soon. Harrison's men won't stop searching now that they know both Mitchell siblings are in the territory. After Sullivan departed, Lucy finished arranging the cabin. For Jacob's comfort, then tactfully excused herself, leaving the siblings alone for the first time in 3 years. In the quiet that followed, Becca studied her brother's face, noting the changes illness had wrought, but finding comfort in the familiar determination still evident in his eyes. "You look well," Jacob observed, his gaze equally assessing. "Denver agreed with you? It was suitable for my purposes," Becca replied cautiously, uncertain how much Jacob knew or suspected about her activities during their separation. A knowing smile crossed Jacob's gaunt features. "Still careful with your words, I see. Some things never change." The smile faded into seriousness. "Sullivan told me you were intercepted by Cooper's gang before reaching Riverford. Are you truly safe here, or merely a different kind of captive?" "It's complicated," Becca admitted. "Cooper knows, or suspects, about the documents father collected. So does a federal marshal who arrived today. Everyone seems to believe I'm the key to bringing down Harrison." "Aren't you?" Jacob asked simply. Becca touched the locket at her throat, the hidden numbers it contained representing both tremendous power and terrible risk. "The documents are still where I hid them 3 years ago. But using them now, with Harrison already hunting us and his position at North Star potentially threatened by Catherine Walsh's arrival." She shook her head, uncertainty clouding her thoughts. "The timing is both perfect and disastrous. Father always said timing was everything in banking and justice alike," Jacob mused, his voice taking on the distant quality of memory. "Too soon, and your move is obvious. Too late, and the opportunity is lost. And innocents suffer while you wait." "For the perfect moment," Becca added, echoing Townsend's earlier accusation. Jacob studied her with unexpected perception, despite his weakened state. "You've carried this burden alone for too long, Becca. Perhaps it's time to trust others with at least part of it. Trust Cooper, a federal marshal, Sullivan, who seems connected to everyone." She couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "Trust your own judgment," Jacob clarified. "You were always better at reading people than I was. Father knew that. It's why he entrusted you with his evidence rather than me, even though I was the obvious choice as his son and clerk in training." This admission startled Becca. "You knew? All this time?" A sad smile crossed Jacob's face. "Not the specifics. Father was too careful for that. But I knew he was collecting evidence against Harrison. I knew he feared what might happen if North Star discovered his activities. And I suspected, after you disappeared the night of the bank robbery, that you had taken something more valuable than money." The revelation that Jacob had carried his own suspicions and understanding throughout their separation created a strange mixture of relief and regret in Becca's heart. She might have shared her burden sooner had she known he was already partly aware of the truth. "The money was necessary to establish my new identity in Denver," she explained, finally sharing details she had kept hidden for years. "I needed to become someone Harrison wouldn't connect to Rebecca Mitchell, someone who could move freely while watching for the right opportunity to use Father's evidence. And now that opportunity has arrived," Jacob concluded, his perception accurate despite his limited knowledge of recent events. Before Becca could respond, a soft knock at the door announced Cooper's arrival. He entered with the contained energy of a man managing multiple crises simultaneously, his gaze moving from Jacob to Becca with undisguised interest in their reunion. "Sullivan has explained the situation in Riverford," he said without preamble. "Harrison has effectively declared open war, not just on my operation, but apparently on anyone connected to the Mitchell family or the missing documents. Which means we're no longer safe anywhere in the territory," Becca surmised. Cooper nodded grimly. "Harrison's men continue to probe our defenses here at Crescent Ridge. It's only a matter of time before they attempt a direct assault, especially if they believe both Mitchell siblings are present." "And Marshal Townsend?" Becca asked. "Where does he stand in all this?" "Cautiously aligned with our interests, at least regarding Harrison," Cooper replied. He's proposed evacuating Jacob to Denver under federal protection while you recover the documents and provide them as evidence for prosecution. Jacob's expression grew troubled. Separation again, after we've only just reunited? It would be temporary, Cooper assured him, and potentially the safest option given your condition and Harrison's determination. Becca rose from her chair, moving to the cabin's small window. Outside, Cooper's sentries maintained their vigilant watch at the camp's perimeter, weapons ready against the threat lurking in the darkness beyond. The precariousness of their situation was undeniable. Harrison's forces surrounding them, Jacob too ill for rigorous travel, the evidence hidden, miles away in a location known only to Becca herself. There's another option, she said finally, turning back to face Cooper and Jacob, one that doesn't require immediate separation or rely on Townsend's promises of protection. Cooper's interest visibly sharpened. I'm listening. Catherine Walsh arrives in Riverford tomorrow for the board meeting, Becca reminded him. Sullivan mentioned she's already discovered financial irregularities and intends to challenge Harrison's leadership. If she succeeded in ousting him, his power would be significantly diminished. Cooper completed her thought, but not eliminated. He still has allies throughout the territorial government and judiciary. Unless we provide Mrs. Walsh with others' evidence before the board meeting, Becca continued. With proof of Harrison's criminal activities in hand, she could do more than simply remove him from North Star's presidency. She could initiate private legal action against him immediately, freezing his assets and limiting his ability to retaliate while Townsend builds his federal case. Jacob coughed weakly, drawing their attention. You're suggesting a temporary alliance with Catherine Walsh? A woman whose husband was Harrison's partner in North Star's worst abuses? Sullivan and Diana both indicated Walsh seems genuine. In her desire to reform the company's practices, Becca countered. Her audit, her replacement of Harrison's security personnel, these suggest she's not continuing her husband's approach. Cooper considered the proposal with the tactical assessment of a strategist. Reaching Walsh before the board meeting would require moving quickly and through territory Harrison now actively patrols. Getting to Riverford undetected. I didn't say the documents were in Riverford, Becca interrupted. This caught Cooper's full attention. Where are they? First, I need your word that Jacob will remain under your protection while I retrieve them, Becca insisted, and that you'll provide men to accompany me, not to control my actions, but to ensure I can complete my task safely. Cooper studied her with those penetrating green eyes, clearly weighing her sincerity against the risk of deception. You have my word regarding your brother's protection, he said finally, and I'll accompany you personally, along with Diana and 2 others. I trust implicitly. But this arrangement requires mutual honesty, Miss Mitchell. Where exactly are we going? Becca hesitated, the habit of secrecy warring with the practical necessity of cooperation. Jacob's weak voice broke the impasse. Trust your judgment, Becca, he reminded her. Father would understand that circumstances have changed. With a deep breath, Becca made her decision. The documents are hidden in the abandoned Eagle Mine, 15 miles northwest of Riverford. Father chose it because North Star had declared the site worthless after initial exploration, ensuring it would remain undisturbed. The specific location is marked by a sequence of numbers that only I know. Cooper's expression reflected grudging admiration for the simplicity and effectiveness of the hiding place. When do we leave? First light, Becca decided. If we move quickly, we can retrieve the documents and reach Riverford before Mrs. Walsh's meeting with the board tomorrow afternoon. Jacob reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite his weakness. Be careful, Becca. Harrison has killed for less than what you're about to do. I'll return, she promised, squeezing his hand gently. "And when I do, we'll finally finish what Father started." As Cooper departed to prepare for the morning's journey, Becca remained at Jacob's bedside, watching as exhaustion gradually overcame him and he drifted into restless sleep. The decision to reveal the location of the documents after 3 years of absolute secrecy felt both liberating and terrifying. Had she trusted the right people? Was Catherine Walsh truly different from her husband, or merely continuing north? Starr's corruption under a more benevolent guise? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Diana stood in the doorway, her expression somber in the lamplight. "Cooper asked me to relieve you," she explained quietly. "You should rest before tomorrow's journey." "I'd rather stay with Jacob," Becca replied, reluctant to leave her brother so soon after their reunion. "Lucy will be here as well," Diana assured her. "Between us, we'll ensure he's never alone or unprotected." She approached the bed, studying Jacob's sleeping form with unexpected compassion. Consumption is a cruel illness, but not insurmountable with proper care. Once Harrison is dealt with, your brother can recover somewhere safe, with better conditions than a hideout under siege. The practical wisdom in Diana's assessment was undeniable. Becca needed rest if she was to lead Cooper and the others to the Eagle Mine tomorrow, a journey that would require all her strength and clarity of mind. "Wake me if his condition changes," she requested, rising reluctantly from her chair. Diana nodded. "Of course." As Becca moved toward the door, Diana added, "Cooper has instructed Ollie to prepare the cabin next to this one for you. It's small, but secure, and close enough that you'll hear if Jacob needs you during the night." The consideration behind this arrangement touched Becca unexpectedly. Throughout her captivity at Crescent Ridge, Cooper had consistently demonstrated a respect for her comfort and dignity that contradicted the brutal reputation of his gang. Even as he pursued his own agenda regarding the documents, he had treated her less as a prisoner than as a valuable ally deserving of consideration. Outside, the camp had settled into the eerie quiet of a settlement under threat. Armed sentries maintained positions at all approaches, their vigilance a constant reminder of the danger surrounding them. Ollie waited beside the neighboring cabin, his youthful face serious in the moonlight. "Everything's ready, Miss Mitchell," he reported. "Fresh water, clean bedding, an extra blanket since the night's turning cold." "Thank you, Ollie," Becca said with genuine appreciation for the young man's consistent kindness. "Will you be joining us tomorrow for the journey to Eagle Mine?" Pride flashed across his features. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Cooper picked me himself, along with Sam, if he's recovered enough from his wound." The inclusion of Ollie seemed an odd choice, given his youth and inexperience compared to other members of Cooper's gang. Reading her expression accurately, Ollie added, "I grew up near Eagle Mine. My pa worked there before North Star declared it worthless. I know every tunnel and shaft in that mountain." This explanation made Cooper's selection more comprehensible and more impressive as a tactical decision. Having someone familiar with the mine's layout could prove invaluable if they encountered complications or needed to evade pursuit. "Then I'm glad you'll be with us," Becca said sincerely. "Now get some rest yourself. Tomorrow will test all of us." After Ollie departed, Becca entered the small cabin he had prepared. True to his word, everything had been arranged for comfortable, if basic, accommodation. She removed her boots and outer garments, but remained otherwise dressed, unwilling to be caught unprepared if an emergency arose during the night. As she lay on the narrow bed, staring at the rough-hewn ceiling, the events of the past days swirled through her mind in a chaotic parade. The Stagecoach robbery that had changed everything. Cooper's unexpected interest in her past. Sullivan's complex role in both Jacob's care and Cooper's operations. Townsend's arrival with his federal authority and promise of justice. And now, the imminent expedition to retrieve the documents her father had sacrificed so much to compile. 3 years of careful waiting were about to culminate in action that would irrevocably change the territory's future, and her own. If they succeeded in delivering the evidence to Catherine Walsh before the board meeting, Harrison's power would be broken. If they failed, or if Walsh proved unreceptive to their approach, the consequences would be dire for everyone involved. Sleep claimed Becca gradually. Her final conscious thoughts focused on the sequence of numbers hidden in her locket, the key to a truth long concealed but soon to be revealed. Morning arrived with mist clinging to the plateau of Crescent Ridge, shrouding the camp in a ghostly haze that seemed appropriate to the gravity of the day ahead. Becca woke before dawn, checking first on Jacob, who slept peacefully under Lucy's watchful eye, then joining Cooper and the others as they made final preparations for the journey. Sam, his left arm bandaged but otherwise apparently recovered from his encounter with Harrison's men, inspected their weapons with methodical care. Diana studied a detailed map of the region surrounding Eagle Mine, marking potential routes and hazards. Ollie prepared provisions, his nervous energy manifesting in constant movement as he secured saddlebags and checked equipment for the 5th time. Marshal Townsend, conspicuously absent, had apparently been confined to quarters under Marcus's supervision, a precaution Cooper deemed necessary despite their tentative alignment of interests. The Marshal's cooperation is valuable, Cooper explained when Becca questioned this decision, but not yet proven. I won't risk having federal law at our backs while we attempt to reach the mine undetected. The logic was sound, if somewhat paranoid. Becca found herself increasingly impressed by Cooper's strategic thinking and attention to detail, qualities that explained how his outlaw operation had survived and thrived despite years of pursuit by Harrison's forces and territorial authorities. As the sky lightened with approaching dawn, they gathered at the stables for final instructions. Cooper, dressed in practical riding clothes with his customary pistol at his hip and a rifle secured, drew his saddle, addressed them in low, confident tones. "Our objective is Eagle Mine," he reminded them, though all were already well aware. "We take the North Passage down from the plateau, then cut east through Blackwater Canyon to avoid Harrison's likely patrols along the main roads. Sam will scout. Ahead, Diana and I will ride with Miss Mitchell, and Ollie will watch our rear to ensure we're not followed." "What if Harrison's men have already discovered the mine?" Diana asked, voicing the concern that had surely occurred to all of them. "Unlikely," Cooper replied. "According to our intelligence, their forces are concentrated around Riverford and the approaches to Crescent Ridge. Still, we proceed with maximum caution. No unnecessary risks." He turned to Becca, his green eyes serious in the pre-dawn light. "Once we reach the mine, you lead. We'll provide protection, but the recovery of the documents is entirely in your hands." "I understand," Becca confirmed. Mounting Willow with practiced ease, the mare seemed to sense the importance of their mission, standing alertly as the others mounted their horses. With a final glance at the camp, at Jacob's cabin, where her brother rested under Lucy and Marcus's protection, Becca steeled herself for what lay ahead. The path to justice her father had envisioned 3 years ago was finally clear, though fraught with dangers he could never have anticipated. As they rode away from Crescent Ridge into the lightning day, Becca felt the weight of the locket against her skin, a physical reminder of promises made and soon to be fulfilled. Whatever happened at Eagle Mine, there would be no turning back from the consequences of revealing her father's evidence. Harrison's reign of corruption and intimidation would face its most serious challenge yet, not from outlaws or federal marshals, but from the meticulous documentation of a bank clerk who had simply recorded what he observed, believing that truth, properly presented, was the most powerful weapon against injustice. Ollie's plan, for all its apparent simplicity, proved remarkably effective. While the others remained concealed among the rocks of the ridgeline, the young outlaw circled wide to the eastern edge of the valley. There, with impressive skill for one so young, he started a small, controlled fire in a stand of dry brush, then fired 3 shots in rapid succession before retreating to his hidden position. The patrol reacted precisely as Cooper had predicted. 3 riders immediately raced toward the disturbance, assuming it signaled the presence of Cooper's gang, their primary quarry. The 4th remained behind, maintaining vigilance over the main trail, but one man alone presented a manageable obstacle. "Diana," Cooper said quietly as they watched the scene unfold below, "can you handle the remaining guard without raising an alarm?" Diana's expression was coolly confident as she checked her rifle. "He won't see me coming." "No killing unless absolutely necessary," Cooper instructed. "We don't need a body to explain if Harrison's men return." With a nod of acknowledgement, Diana slipped away, moving with the silent efficiency of a mountain cat as she descended toward the valley floor. The others watched as she disappeared into the sparse cover, circling behind the lone guard's position, with remarkable stealth. "She was a hunter before joining your gang?" Becca asked, impressed by Diana's woodcraft. "Among other things," Cooper replied cryptically. "Diana's talents are exceptionally diverse." They waited in tense silence as the minutes stretched. In the distance, smoke from Ollie's diversion continued to rise, drawing the attention of the other patrolmen. Finally, Diana's signal, a bird call too precise to be natural, rose from below. "Path clear," Sam translated unnecessarily. "Let's move while we can." They descended quickly, finding Diana standing over the unconscious form of the guard who had been neatly trussed and gagged, then secured to a pine tree some distance from the trail. "He'll be uncomfortable when he wakes, but unharmed," she reported. "The others are still investigating the eastern ridge. We have perhaps 20 minutes before they realize the alarm was false." Cooper nodded approvingly. "Enough time to reach the mine entrance if we ride hard. Ollie, coming up the north draw now," Sam confirmed, gesturing to a barely visible figure on horseback approaching from the east. Once reunited, the group set off at a gallop across the open valley floor, abandoning caution for speed. Eagle Mine's entrance lay in a steep ravine on the mountain's western face, a dark rectangular opening partially hidden by overgrown vegetation that marked where men had once delved into the mountain's heart seeking mineral wealth. They reached it without further incident, dismounting quickly as Sam and Diana established a defensive perimeter around the entrance. Cooper secured the horses in a small copse of aspens, concealing them from casual observation. Ollie immediately set about examining the mine's timber supports, testing their integrity with the practiced eye of someone raised in mining country. "Main supports are holding," he confirmed after a brief inspection. "But we should move carefully. Vibrations could disturb sections that have weakened over time." Cooper turned to Becca, who stood before the dark entrance with a mixture of determination and apprehension. "This is your show now, Miss Mitchell. We'll follow your lead." Becca nodded, removing a small tin lantern from her saddlebag. When lit, it cast a warm golden glow that did little to penetrate the oppressive darkness of the abandoned mine shaft. She paused at the threshold, mentally reviewing the directions her father had given her 3 years before. Instructions she had committed to memory alongside the crucial numbers in her locket. "Stay close," she advised, stepping into the mine's mouth. "The alcove is approximately 300 yards in, and the tunnel branches twice before we reach it." The air inside was cool and damp, heavy with the earthy scent of stone and rotting timbers. Their footsteps echoed hollowly as they advanced, the lantern's light revealing rusted rail tracks set into the uneven floor, remnants of the carts once used to transport ore from the mountain's depths. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness ahead, the steady plink-plink creating an eerie cadence that marked their progress. First branch coming up, Ollie warned from just behind Becca. Main shaft continues straight, secondary tunnels to the left and right. The intersection appeared in the lantern light, 3 black mouths yawning in different directions. Becca consulted her memory, then pointed straight ahead. We continue on the main shaft. They proceeded more cautiously now, as the ceiling lowered and the support timbers showed increasing signs of stress. Occasionally, a disconcerting creak would emanate from the darkness above, causing them to pause until silence returned. Second branch ahead, Becca announced as they reached another junction. This time, she indicated the right-hand passage. The alcove is approximately 50 yards down this tunnel. Cooper, who had maintained a vigilant presence just behind her, spoke quietly. Time is becoming a factor. Harrison's men will have discovered their missing comrade by now. The reminder was unnecessary, but effective. Becca increased her pace, holding the lantern higher to better illuminate the way ahead. True to her memory, the tunnel soon revealed a small alcove cut into the rock wall, a space perhaps 8 feet square that had once served as storage for mining equipment. This is it, she confirmed, stepping into the recess and raising the lantern to examine the rear wall. At first glance, it appeared solid and unremarkable, just another section of the rough-hewn stone that formed the mine's interior. But Becca moved with confidence now, counting paces from the alcove's entrance to a specific point along the back wall. 7 paces in, then 3 to the right, she murmured, mostly to herself. Reaching the spot, she handed the lantern to Cooper and knelt, running her fingers along the base of the wall where it met the earthen floor. After a moment of searching, she found what she sought, a small depression barely distinguishable from the natural irregularities of the stone. Here, she said, pressing firmly. With a grating sound, a section of the seemingly solid wall shifted slightly, revealing itself to be a cleverly disguised panel set into the rock face. Cooper's expression reflected genuine surprise, a rare break in his usual composure. Impressive craftsmanship. My father didn't create this, Becca explained as she worked to loosen the panel further. According to him, it was built by the original mine owner to hide high-grade ore samples from company inspectors, allowing him to manipulate investment by showing only average specimens during official assessments. With a final tug, the panel came free, revealing a small cavity within the wall. Becca reached inside and carefully extracted a metal strongbox, compact enough to be portable but sturdy enough to protect its contents from the mine's damp conditions. Its surface was dusty, but otherwise untouched, the heavy padlock intact. "The key?" Cooper asked as Becca rose with the box cradled against her chest. In answer, she reached for her locket, opening it with practiced fingers to reveal not just the hidden paper with its sequence of numbers, but a tiny compartment concealed behind it. From this secret space, she extracted a small key that matched the strong box's padlock. "Father always believed in redundancy," she explained, fitting the key to the lock. "The numbers were a backup in case the key was lost. Coordinates to locate this alcove combined with the combination for an alternative method of opening the box." The lock opened with a satisfying click. Inside, carefully preserved in oilskin wrappings, lay several leather-bound journals, along with folders containing what appeared to be financial records, deeds, and correspondence. Becca handled these items reverently, quickly confirming that everything remained exactly as her father had described. "These are the originals," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "Ledgers detailing bribes to territorial officials. Correspondence between Harrison and Judge Holloway regarding falsified land claims. Maps showing how North Star deliberately diverted water sources to devalue neighboring properties before acquisition. Comprehensive evidence of systematic corruption," Cooper summarized, examining one of the journals over Becca's shoulder. "Your father was remarkably thorough." "He was a banker," Becca replied simply, Precision and documentation were second nature to him. Ollie, who had been keeping watch at the alcove's entrance, suddenly hissed a warning. "Something's wrong. Listen." They fell silent, straining to hear whatever had alarmed the young outlaw. At first, there was nothing but the mine's natural sounds: dripping water, creaking timber, the soft settling of dust. Then, faintly but unmistakably, came the echo of voices from the direction of the entrance. "Harrison's men," Cooper concluded grimly. "They must have found our horses." "How? Many?" Diana asked, her hand moving to her holstered pistol. "Can't tell," Ollie replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sound carries strangely in these tunnels. Could be 2, could be a dozen." Cooper's mind worked rapidly, assessing their limited options. There must be another way out. Mines this size typically have secondary exits for emergencies. "The ventilation shaft," Ollie confirmed, his expression brightening with recognition. "Third level down, eastern side. It was used as an alternate entrance when my pa worked here." "But that's deeper into the mine," Diana pointed out. "We'd have to get past whoever's coming in." "Not necessarily," Ollie countered. "There's a connecting passage between this level and the third that bypasses the main shaft. Mining crews used it as a shortcut." "Where?" Cooper demanded. "Further along this same tunnel, maybe 100 yards past this alcove." Cooper made his decision instantly. "We take the connecting passage to the ventilation shaft. Becca, secure. Those documents. We move now." Becca hurriedly returned the evidence to the strongbox, locking it and slipping the key back into her locket before tucking the box firmly under her arm. The voices from the mine entrance were growing louder, accompanied by the distinct sound of multiple footsteps approaching along the main shaft. Ollie led the way, moving deeper into the secondary tunnel with the lantern held low to minimize its visibility from behind. The passage narrowed as they advanced, the ceiling dropping further until they were forced to proceed in a half-crouch. The air grew noticeably staler, a testament to how rarely this section of the mine was ventilated. Junction ahead," Ollie whispered after several minutes of tense progress. "Connecting passage will be on the left wall, easily missed if you don't know it's there." True to his description, the entrance to the connecting passage appeared as little more than a shadow in the rough stone wall, a narrow opening barely wide enough for an adult to squeeze through. Ollie went first, demonstrating the awkward sideways shuffle required to navigate the tight space. Diana followed, then Becca with the strongbox clutched protectively against her chest, and finally Cooper, who paused to listen for pursuit before entering the cramped passage. The connecting tunnel was a nightmare of confinement, barely shoulder width, with a low ceiling that forced them to bend almost double as they inched along in near-total darkness. Only the faint glow of the lantern ahead provided any illumination, creating a claustrophobic journey through what felt like the mountain's very bones. Just as Becca's muscles began to scream in protest at the unnatural posture, Ollie called back softly, "Opening up ahead. We're almost to the third level." You see, passage gradually widened, finally opening into a larger tunnel that ran perpendicular to their path. This new space was noticeably different, taller, with more substantial support timbers and evidence of more extensive mining activity. Rusted equipment lay abandoned where workers had left it when the mine closed: picks, shovels, sections of rail for the ore carts. "Ventilation shaft should be approximately 200 yards east," Ollie said, pointing down the tunnel to their right. "It's basically a steep, rough-hewn staircase cut into the rock, leading up to a secondary entrance on the mountain's eastern face." Cooper nodded approvingly. "Good work, Ollie. You've proven your value today." The young outlaw beamed at the praise before leading them down the tunnel toward their potential escape route. They moved as quickly as caution allowed, aware that their pursuers might eventually discover the connecting passage if they conducted a thorough search of the mine. The ventilation shaft appeared much as Ollie had described, a diagonal passage, cutting upward through the mountain at a steep angle, with crude steps carved into its floor. Unlike the main entrance, which had been properly framed with timber supports, this was little more than a rough chute through the rock, relying on the mountain's natural stability rather than human engineering. "It's a hard climb," Ollie warned, holding the lantern up to illuminate the passage, "and parts may have collapsed since the mine was abandoned." "Any better options?" Cooper asked practically. Diana shook her head. "If Harrison's men are at the main entrance, this is our only way out." "Then we climb," Cooper decided. "Ollie leads with the lantern, Diana follows, then Becca, and I'll bring up the rear to cover our trail." The ascent proved every bit as challenging as anticipated. The carved steps were unevenly spaced and slippery with moisture, requiring careful placement of each foot to avoid a potentially disastrous fall. The strongbox hampered Becca's balance, forcing her to rely on one hand for stability against the rough wall. Several times, loose rock tumbled down from above as Ollie and Diana disturbed the unstable passage ahead. They had climbed perhaps halfway to the surface when a distant shout echoed up from below, a voice calling out in discovery. Their escape route had been found. "Keep moving," Cooper urged from behind Becca. "They'll be hampered by the same terrain." "We are." The knowledge that they were being pursued lent new urgency to their climb. Muscles burning from the exertion, lungs straining in the thin, dusty air, they pushed upward with grim determination. Finally, after what seemed an eternity of painful ascent, Ollie called down from above. "I can see daylight." The exit's partially blocked, but there's enough space to squeeze through. The news gave them a second wind for the final push to freedom. One by one, they emerged from the mountain's grasp into the bright afternoon sunlight of the eastern slope. First Ollie, then Diana, followed by Becca with the precious strongbox still clutched tightly under her arm, and finally Cooper, who immediately set about arranging rocks to partially obstruct the shaft behind them. "That won't hold them long," he acknowledged as he worked, "but it might buy us a few extra minutes." Freed from the mine's oppressive confines, they took stock of their situation. The ventilation shaft had emerged high on Eagle Mountain's eastern, a face in a rocky area sparsely dotted with stunted pine trees. Far below, the valley stretched toward distant hills, with no sign of their horses or immediate pursuit. "We're exposed here," Diana observed, scanning the terrain with a professional eye. "And without mounts, we're limited in our options." "Riverford lies approximately 12 miles southeast," Cooper said, pointing toward a distant gap between two hills. "We could reach it on foot by nightfall if we push hard. Assuming Harrison's men don't catch up to us first," Becca added, securing the strongbox more comfortably against her side. Ollie, who had been exploring the immediate vicinity, called out excitedly from a nearby outcropping. "Mr. Cooper, there's a trail down here. Looks like it connects to the old mining road about half a mile below." This was welcome news. A proper trail would make their descent considerably faster than attempting to navigate the rocky mountainside without a path. They moved quickly to join Ollie, finding that his discovery was indeed a narrow but well-defined trail that switched back down the mountain's eastern face. Probably used by the mine supervisors to reach the ventilation shaft for inspections. Cooper surmised, "It's a stroke of luck." "We're still without horses," Diana reminded him pragmatically, "and 12 miles remains a significant distance on foot, especially if we're carrying evidence that could condemn the territory's most powerful man." Cooper's expression revealed the rapid calculations of a tactician considering limited options. "We split up," he decided after a moment's thought. "Diana and Ollie head north to the Whispering Pines Road. There's a chance you'll encounter friendly travel, Sullivan perhaps, or one of our own people. Becca and I will take the direct route to Riverford. If all goes well, we rendezvous at Catherine Walsh's lodging before the board meeting tomorrow." Diana frowned at the proposal. Dividing our strength seems risky, with Harrison's men hunting us. 2 groups create 2 targets, Cooper countered. They'll be forced to split their forces if they pick up both trails. And if one group is captured or delayed, the other might still reach Walsh with the evidence. The logic was sound, if desperate. Without horses, their options were severely limited, and the need to reach Riverford before Walsh's confrontation with Harrison at the board meeting created an unyielding deadline. The documents should be split as well, Becca suggested, opening the strongbox. We'll each carry part of the evidence, ensuring that even if one group is captured, Harrison can't recover everything. Cooper nodded approvingly. Good thinking. Select the most damning evidence for our group, since we're taking the more direct route. Becca quickly sorted through her father's meticulous records, dividing them into 2 roughly equal portions based on their significance. The journals documenting direct payoffs to territorial officials, along with the correspondence between Harrison and Judge Holloway, she kept for herself and Cooper. The maps showing water rights manipulation and records of threatened ranches went with Diana and Ollie. If you reach Riverford first, Cooper instructed Diana, secure a meeting with Walsh immediately. Don't wait for us if the board meeting is imminent. Diana nodded, accepting her portion of the evidence and securing it inside her jacket. And if neither group makes it in time, then Townsend becomes our fallback, Cooper replied grimly. He's still at Crescent Ridge under Marcus's supervision. If we fail to return by tomorrow morning, Marcus has instructions to release him with the information about Eagle Mine. With their plans established, the group separated at the base of the mountain, Diana and Ollie striking north toward the road to Whispering Pines, while Cooper and Becca set out southeast, following a direct line toward Riverford. The afternoon sun beat down upon the open country, promising several hours of hot, grueling travel before evening would bring cooler temperatures. They maintained a brisk pace, Cooper setting a route that maximized available cover while minimizing unnecessary climbs or detours. His knowledge of the territory was impressive, a testament to years spent mapping the region for his outlaw operations. They spoke little as they walked, conserving energy and remaining alert for signs of pursuit. After several miles, as they paused briefly beside a small stream to refill their canteens, Becca studied Cooper with renewed curiosity. In the days since their first encounter during the Stagecoach robbery, her perception of him had evolved dramatically, from threatening outlaw to complex strategist with principles that, while unorthodox, aligned surprisingly well with her own sense of justice. "Why did you really intercept my stagecoach that day?" she asked suddenly. "You claimed it was to protect me from Harrison, but you couldn't have known I possessed these documents." Cooper took a drink from his canteen before answering, "I suspected. Your father's position at the bank gave him unique access to information about North Star's financial dealings. When he died unexpectedly and the bank was robbed the same night you disappeared, taking only documents and money, it suggested a connection. But why wait 3 years to find me? You could have tracked me to Denver much earlier if you'd been determined." "I didn't know you were in Denver until recently," Cooper admitted. "Your trail was remarkably well concealed. It was Sullivan who finally connected Rebecca Mitchell with Rebecca Adams, though he kept that information to himself until your brother's illness forced his hand." This revelation confirmed Becca's suspicion that Sullivan had played a more intricate role in events than she had initially believed. "And Harrison, when did he start actively searching for me?" "About a year ago," Cooper replied. "Something changed. Perhaps he discovered evidence that the missing documents still existed rather than having been destroyed. His men began asking questions about you in settlements throughout the territory, offering rewards for information." Becca absorbed this information as they resumed their journey, the documents a constant weight against her side. They had covered perhaps half the distance to Riverford, when the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats reached them from behind, multiple riders approaching at speed from the direction of Eagle Mountain. "Down!" Cooper ordered, pulling Becca into the cover of a rocky outcropping, just as 4 horsemen crested a rise approximately half a mile behind them. Through Cooper's field glasses, Becca could make out the distinctive dusters worn by North Star's security force. "They're following our trail," she observed grimly. "And mounted, they'll overtake us long before we reach Riverford." Cooper's expression revealed no panic, only the calm assessment of a man accustomed to adapting to rapidly changing circumstances. "We need to reach higher ground. Force them to dismount if they want to pursue us. The Morrison Cliffs lie about a mile east. If we can reach them, we gain a defensive position." The Morrison Cliffs, a series of steep, rocky bluffs overlooking the eastern plains, represented their best hope of evading their pursuers. They set off at a run, abandoning the pretense of concealment for speed. Behind them, shouts indicated they had been spotted, followed by the sound of horses being urged to greater speed. The sun was lowering toward the western horizon by the time they reached the base of the cliffs, a jumbled mass of boulders and steep inclines leading to a plateau perhaps 100 feet above the surrounding landscape. The natural fortress offered numerous defensive positions and narrow approaches that would indeed force their pursuers to continue on foot. "Up there," Cooper directed, pointing to a zigzagging path between the rocks. "Move quickly but carefully. A broken ankle now would be disastrous." They climbed with desperate energy, the knowledge of approaching danger overriding the fatigue of their long journey from Eagle Mine. Becca's boots slipped on loose stone several times, but Cooper's steadying hand kept her upright and moving. When they finally reached the plateau, both were breathing hard, sweat dampening their clothes despite the cooling evening air. Looking back, they could see their pursuers dismounting at the base of the cliffs, preparing to follow them up. One man remained with the horses, while the other 3 began the ascent, rifles slung across their backs. "They're determined," Becca observed between deep breaths. "Most local law would have given up rather than attempt this climb." "Harrison doesn't employ ordinary men for his security force," Cooper replied, checking his pistol. "These are professional manhunters, likely former Army scouts or mercenaries. They don't abandon a trail once they've found it." The plateau offered several defensive positions, natural stone formations that provided cover while offering visibility of the approaches. Cooper selected a spot where 2 large boulders created a protected nook with a clear view of the path they had ascended. "We make our stand here," he decided. "With darkness approaching, we have the advantage. They'll be climbing blind while we can see them against the skyline." Becca set the documents down carefully within their makeshift fortress, then removed a derringer from her satchel. The small pistol seemed woefully inadequate compared to Cooper's revolver, but it was better than facing Harrison's men unarmed. 2 shots, she acknowledged ruefully, displaying the tiny weapon. "Not much, but I know how to use it." Cooper studied her with newfound respect. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Mitchell. Most bank clerks' daughters don't generally carry concealed firearms. Most bank clerks' daughters haven't spent 3 years preparing to confront the most powerful man in the territory," she countered with a hint of defiance. A rare smile crossed Cooper's face. "Fair point." He turned serious again, as the sound of dislodged stones indicated their pursuers were making progress up the cliff face. "Use those shots only if absolutely necessary. I'll handle the defense as long as possible." The sun dipped below the western horizon, plunging the landscape into twilight. The waxing moon provided some illumination, but the cliff face fell into deep shadow, making it increasingly difficult to track the approaching men. Cooper positioned himself at the edge of their cover, his revolver ready as he strained to detect movement in the gathering darkness. "What happens if we succeed?" Becca asked quietly, the question that had lingered in her mind finally finding voice. If we reach Walsh with the evidence, if Harrison is removed from power, what becomes of Nathaniel Cooper and his outlaw gang? Cooper didn't turn from his watchful position, but his voice carried a note of consideration that suggested he had contemplated this question himself. Perhaps the territory will find itself with leadership more inclined toward amnesty for those whose crimes were committed against corrupt institutions rather than innocent citizens. And if not? Now he did glance back at her, his green eyes catching the fading light. Then Crescent Ridge remains our sanctuary, and we continue our fight by other means. He paused, studying her with unexpected intensity. The real question, Miss Mitchell, is what becomes of you when your 3-year mission reaches its conclusion? The question struck Becca with surprising force. She had been so focused on retrieving and delivering her father's evidence that she had given little thought to what would follow. Return to Denver, remain in the territory that had once been her home. The future beyond Harrison's downfall stretched before her as an unexplored territory filled with possibilities both daunting and intriguing. Before she could formulate a response, a pebble clattered against stone nearby, a clear indication that their pursuers were nearing the plateau's edge. Cooper immediately refocused on the threat, motioning for Becca to remain absolutely still within their stone shelter. In the deepening gloom, a shadow separated from the greater darkness at the cliff's edge. One of Harrison's men had reached the plateau and was now cautiously surveying the rocky terrain. Cooper held his position, waiting for the man to reveal himself more clearly before engaging. 2 more shadows appeared, joining the first as they conferred in hushed tones. Even in the poor light, their weapons were visible, rifles held ready as they prepared to hunt their quarry across the plateau. "They'll split up to search the area," Cooper whispered, barely audible despite his proximity. "When they do, I'll create a diversion. You circle around to the eastern edge. There's a less steep descent on that side. Get to Riverford with the evidence." "I'm not leaving you to face them alone," Becca protested quietly. "This isn't about heroics," Cooper replied firmly. "It's about completing the mission your father started. His evidence needs to reach Walsh. Everything else is secondary." The logic was undeniable, but Becca found herself surprisingly reluctant to abandon Cooper to what seemed like impossible odds. This man, who had begun as her captor, had transformed through their shared journey into something far more complex. An ally, a protector, perhaps even something more that neither had dared to name amid the constant pressure of their circumstances. As Harrison's men spread out to begin their search of the plateau, Cooper checked his revolver one final time. "Go now," he instructed, his voice betraying no fear despite the dire situation. "Stay low, move quickly but quietly. The eastern path will be visible once you reach the ridgeline." Becca hesitated, then made an impulsive decision. Opening the strongbox, she removed half the remaining documents, pressing them into Cooper's hands. "If something happens to me, these still need to reach Walsh or Townsend. Promise me you'll deliver them if I can't." Cooper accepted the papers, with solemn acknowledgement of her trust. "You have my word." He tucked them securely inside his jacket, then added with unexpected gentleness, "Be careful, Rebecca." The use of her first name, so casual yet so significant in this moment of crisis, caught her off guard. In that instant, something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that transcended their unusual circumstances and complicated relationship. "You too, Nathaniel," she replied, matching his informal address. With the strongbox now lighter but still containing crucial evidence, Becca prepared to make her escape while Cooper created his promised diversion. As she crouched, ready to move, the sharp crack of a rifle split the night, but it came neither from Cooper nor Harrison's men on the plateau. From somewhere below, at the base of the cliffs, another shot rang out, followed by confused shouting. Cooper risked a glance over their protective boulder, then turned to Becca with an expression of disbelief that quickly transformed into hope. "Riders," he reported tersely, "a dozen at least, engaging Harrison's man who stayed with the horses." He squinted into the darkness, trying to identify the newcomers. "It's Diana. She must have found help, and there's someone else, a woman on a black horse, directing the others." Becca joined him at the boulder's edge, straining to see through the gathering darkness. The scene below was chaos. Mounted figures, surrounding the base of the cliff, exchanging gunfire with the surprised remnants of Harrison's security team. The woman Cooper had noted sat straight-backed on her mount, issuing commands with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Catherine Walsh," Becca breathed, recognition dawning despite the distance and poor light. "But how?" Cooper shook his head in amazement. "Diana must have intercepted her on the road to Riverford. Only Walsh could have authorized her security detail to engage Harrison's men directly." The three searchers on the plateau, hearing the commotion below, had abandoned their methodical hunt to investigate the threat to their companions. As they gathered at the cliff's edge, momentarily distracted, Cooper seized the opportunity. "Now," he whispered urgently, "while they're focused downward, we make for the eastern path together." Moving silently across the rocky plateau, they circled wide around Harrison's distracted men, reaching the eastern ridge without detection. The path Cooper had mentioned was indeed visible, a less steep but narrower trail that descended the cliffs in a different direction than their original ascent. The gunfire below had largely subsided by the time they began their careful descent, suggesting that the confrontation had reached a conclusion. Whether favorable or not, remained to be seen. They proceeded cautiously, aware that a misstep in the darkness could result in a fatal fall. When they finally reached the base of the eastern cliff, they were met by the welcome sight of Diana riding toward them, accompanied by two mounted figures Becca didn't recognize. Behind them, a larger group remained near the western cliff face, securing Harrison's subdued men. "Perfect timing as usual, Cooper," Diana called as she approached, genuine relief evident in her voice. "We thought we might be too late." "How did you manage this?" Cooper asked, gesturing toward the assembled riders. "Luck and desperation in equal measure," Diana replied. "Ollie and I encountered Mrs. Walsh's security detail on the road to Whispering Pines. They were searching for Harrison's men who had attacked Sullivan's clinic. When we explained the situation and showed her the documents we carried, she immediately ordered her forces to help locate you." Catherine Walsh herself approached now, dismounting with the practiced ease of an experienced rider. She was perhaps 40, with dark hair streaked with silver and the composed bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Her riding clothes were expensive but practical, suggesting a woman who valued function alongside appearance. "Mr. Cooper," she acknowledged with a nod that conveyed neither approval nor condemnation of his outlaw status. Her attention turned to Becca, her gaze sharpening with interest. "And you must be Rebecca Mitchell. Your reputation, or perhaps I should say your absence, has been a topic of significant interest in Riverford for 3 years." Becca straightened, meeting the older woman's assessing look directly. "Mrs. Walsh, your intervention is fortuitously timed." "So I gather," Walsh replied dryly. "Your companions were quite persuasive regarding the urgency of your situation." Her expression turned serious. "They also showed me documents that confirm suspicions I've harbored since my husband's death. If what you carry is similarly damning, Edward Harrison's days at North Star Mining are numbered." Becca lifted the documents she still held. "This contains comprehensive evidence of Harrison's corruption, bribery of officials, fraudulent land acquisitions, manipulation of water rights. My father documented everything during his years at the Riverford Bank." Walsh's eyes widened slightly at the mention of Becca's father, John Mitchell. I remember him. Precise, observant, unfailingly courteous. My husband always spoke highly of his attention to detail. A shadow crossed her face. I often wondered if Gregory knew the full extent of Harrison's activities, or if he was merely another victim of his partner's manipulation. The evidence suggests your husband was kept deliberately uninformed about the more egregious aspects of Harrison's operation. Cooper offered diplomatically, though Becca suspected. This assessment might be more charitable than accurate. Walsh accepted this with a slight nod, neither agreeing nor disputing the claim. The board meeting is scheduled for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Harrison believes he retains enough support to maintain his position despite my challenges to his financial management. With this evidence, however, she glanced meaningfully at the documents. The balance shifts decisively. Harrison still has men searching for us, Diana reminded them, and he controls significant resources in Riverford itself. My security detail has secured rooms at the Riverford Hotel, Walsh replied. Harrison's influence with the local sheriff means we need private protection until the board meeting. You'll all accompany me there tonight, where we can review these documents thoroughly and prepare our strategy for tomorrow. As arrangements were made for horses to accommodate Cooper and Becca, the realization that their long journey was nearing its conclusion settled over them with surprising poignancy. 3 years of waiting, days of desperate flight and narrow escapes, all culminating in this unexpected alliance with Catherine Walsh on the eve of Harrison's potential downfall. While the others prepared for departure, Cooper drew Becca slightly, apart from the group. In the moonlight, his expression was thoughtful, perhaps even uncertain, a stark contrast to the confident leadership he had displayed throughout their ordeal. "You never answered my question," he said quietly, "about what comes after Harrison's defeat." Becca considered her response carefully, aware that they stood at a crossroads that extended beyond the immediate confrontation with Harrison. "Honestly, I've been so focused on completing my father's work that I never allowed myself to contemplate what might follow." "A reasonable approach," Cooper acknowledged, "though perhaps now is the time to consider possibilities." An unexpected warmth colored his tone, prompting Becca to study his face more intently. Gone was the guarded expression of the outlaw leader, replaced by something more vulnerable and genuine. "What possibilities did you have in mind?" she asked. Before Cooper could respond, Diana approached, effectively ending their private exchange. "Walsh is ready to depart. We should move quickly while we maintain the advantage of surprise." The ride to Riverford proceeded without incident, their party large enough to discourage any remaining elements of Harrison's security force that might have considered interception. The town appeared on the horizon shortly before midnight, a constellation of lights nestled in a valley that had once represented home to Becca, but now felt like a foreign landscape filled with both memories and dangers. The Riverford Hotel stood at the center of town, its 3-story facade illuminated by gas lamps that cast pools of yellow light onto the boardwalk below. Walsh's security detail had indeed secured the entire top floor, creating a defensible position from which to prepare for the coming confrontation. As they entered through a side entrance, Becca noted the strategic positioning of guards, professional men whose demeanor suggested military training rather than the thuggish intimidation favored by Harrison's forces. In a spacious suite converted to a temporary headquarters, Walsh immediately set about reviewing the evidence from the strongbox. Diana and Cooper contributed their tactical expertise regarding Harrison's likely responses once he realized the full extent of the threat to his position. Messengers were dispatched to ensure that key board members would be present for the morning meeting, while others delivered instructions to Walsh's legal representatives. Amidst this flurry of activity, Becca found herself momentarily isolated. A spectator to the machinery of justice her father's meticulous work had set in motion. 3 years of carrying this burden alone had conditioned her to solitary vigilance. Now, surrounded by allies actively working toward Harrison's downfall, she experienced a strange mixture of relief and disorientation. "Miss Mitchell," Dr. Sullivan's voice cut through her reflections. The physician had apparently arrived separately, and now approached with evident concern. "I've just received word about your brother's condition." Becca's attention sharpened immediately. "Jacob, has something happened?" "Quite the opposite," Sullivan assured her quickly. "Marshal Townsend arranged for federal deputies to secure Crescent Ridge after Harrison's forces withdrew to pursue you and Cooper. Jacob is safe and reportedly showing improvement in the mountain air." The news lifted a weight Becca hadn't fully acknowledged she was carrying. With Jacob secure and the evidence finally in hands capable of using it effectively, a tentative sense of completion began to take root. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for everything you've done for my brother and for keeping faith with my father's vision even after his death." Sullivan nodded solemnly. John Mitchell was one of the few men in Riverford who recognized Harrison's corruption for what it was. He trusted me with protecting his children if circumstances required it. A shadow crossed his face. "I only wish he had confided his documentation plans more fully. Perhaps then your exile wouldn't have been necessary." "It served its purpose," Becca replied, glancing toward where Walsh continued to examine the evidence. With steadily increasing indignation, distance provided safety and time allowed for the right moment to present itself. As the night deepened, preparations continued with the methodical precision of a military campaign. Becca contributed where needed, clarifying details about specific documents and explaining the organizational system her father had employed. By dawn, a comprehensive strategy had been established, one that would use the board meeting as a public forum to expose Harrison's crimes, while simultaneously filing legal actions that would freeze his assets and limit his ability to flee. Walsh, despite having worked through the night, appeared remarkably composed as she outlined final instructions to her team. "Harrison believes he's entering a conventional boardroom struggle over financial management," she explained. "He has no idea we possess irrefutable evidence of criminal activity. The element of surprise remains our greatest advantage." Cooper, who had maintained a watchful presence throughout the night, approached Becca as others dispersed to complete their assigned tasks before the meeting. "There's something you should know," he said quietly. "Townsend sent word through Sullivan that federal marshals are prepared to take Harrison into custody immediately following the board meeting. He's been coordinating with Walsh's legal team since midnight." "That's good news," Becca observed, though Cooper's expression suggested a more complex situation. "It is," he agreed. "For justice, for the territory, for everyone Harrison has harmed." He hesitated, then continued with careful neutrality. "It also means Townsend will expect certain considerations regarding other individuals involved in today's events." Becca immediately understood his meaning. "Your immunity from prosecution." Cooper's mouth quirked in a wry half-smile. "Let's call it a temporary understanding. Townsend's primary focus is Harrison and the territorial officials implicated in your father's evidence. My activities remain secondary concerns, at least for now." "And that arrangement extends to your people at Crescent Ridge?" "Those who haven't committed violent crimes, yes." Cooper's expression grew more serious. "Diana, Sam, Ollie, they have paths forward that don't lead to prison cells. Others will need to make individual arrangements or relocate to less jurisdictionally rigorous territories." The practical reality of dismantling an outlaw operation struck Becca as remarkably similar to the challenge of rebuilding her own life now that her long mission neared completion. Both involved transitions from established patterns into uncertain futures, a process requiring both courage and adaptability. "What about you?" she asked directly. "Where does Nathaniel Cooper go when there's no longer a need for his particular brand of frontier justice?" The question seemed to catch him off guard despite its obvious relevance. For a moment, the composed outlaw leader gave way to a man genuinely contemplating possibilities that had perhaps seemed too distant to consider seriously until now. "There's land north of here," he said finally. "My grandfather's original claim before he expanded to the ranch Harrison eventually seized. It's still recorded in my family's name. Too small and remote for North Star to bother with Harrison's power broken and Walsh potentially amenable to addressing past land seizures." He left the thought unfinished, its implications hanging. Between them, a fresh start, Becca supplied, from outlaw to rancher. "A significant transition," Cooper acknowledged, "though perhaps no more significant than the one you face. Rebecca Mitchell can finally reclaim her name and life after 3 years as someone else." Their conversation paused as Diana approached, with news that it was time to proceed to North Star's offices for the board meeting. The moment to continue exploring these personal considerations would have to wait while more pressing matters reached their conclusion. North Star Mining's headquarters dominated Riverford's main street, a 3-story stone edifice whose grandeur stood in stark contrast to the modest wooden structures surrounding it. As Walsh's party approached, the building's imposing facade seemed to represent all that Harrison had built through corruption and intimidation, a monument to power acquired without conscience or consequence. Security personnel stationed at all entrances ensured their group passed unhindered into the building's marble-floored lobby. Employees watched with poorly concealed curiosity as Walsh led them toward the grand staircase leading to the boardroom. On the 2nd floor, Becca, who had never entered this sanctum of Harrison's power, found herself studying her surroundings with the strange perspective of someone seeing familiar territory through entirely new eyes. The boardroom itself reflected North Star's prosperity and Harrison's egotism in equal measure. Rich mahogany paneling lined walls, adorned with maps of the company's holdings throughout the territory. A massive table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by leather chairs currently occupied by board members whose expressions ranged from confusion to alarm at Walsh's unexpected entourage. Edward Harrison sat at the table's head, his imposing figure and carefully groomed appearance designed to project authority and confidence. His self-assurance visibly faltered, however, as his gaze traveled across the assembled group and fixed on Becca. Recognition, followed by carefully controlled anger, flashed across his features before he masked them with a businessman's practiced neutrality. "Mrs. Walsh," he greeted with forced cordiality, "the board was not informed that you would be bringing guests to this morning's proceedings." "Witnesses would be a more accurate term, Mr. Harrison," Walsh replied coolly, taking her position at the opposite end of the table. "Their presence relates directly to the matters we'll be discussing today." As the remaining seats filled with board members, legal representatives, and company executives, Becca noted the subtle power dynamics unfolding through seating arrangements and exchanged glances. Harrison's supporters clustered near his end of the table, while those aligned with or leaning toward Walsh positioned themselves accordingly. A few individuals occupied middle ground, their allegiances apparently undecided pending the meeting's developments. "Before we address the proposed agenda," Walsh began once all were seated, "there are matters of grave importance that supersede ordinary business considerations." She gestured to her attorney, who distributed folders to each board member. These documents detailed systematic corruption, fraud, and criminal activity conducted under North Star Mining's authority and with company resources. Harrison's composure slipped momentarily before he rallied with practiced indignation. "These are serious and entirely unfounded accusations, Mrs. Walsh. I must object to their introduction without proper review and The evidence supporting these accusations, Walsh continued, talking over his objection with calm determination, was meticulously compiled by John Mitchell during his tenure at the Riverford Bank. It includes financial records documenting bribes to territorial officials, correspondence regarding fraudulent land claims, and detailed accounts of water rights manipulation designed to force property sales to North Star at depressed values. At the mention of John Mitchell, several board members glanced toward Becca, making connections that explained her presence. Harrison's expression darkened as he realized the full extent of the threat facing him. "This is nothing but a coordinated attempt to undermine legitimate business practices," he declared, his voice hardening. John Mitchell was a disgruntled employee who was a respected banker who recognized criminal activity when he saw it. Becca interrupted, speaking for the first time. "My father documented your corruption for years, Mr. Harrison. Every transaction, every bribe, every falsified document, all preserved as evidence for precisely this moment." Harrison's face flushed with anger as he turned to address the board. "Gentlemen, surely you don't intend to give credence to accusations from a woman who absconded with bank funds, a thief and a fugitive, accompanied by known outlaws." He gestured dismissively toward Cooper, who remained standing near the door with Diana. "This entire presentation is nothing but a desperate fabrication designed to—" "The evidence speaks for itself, Edward," one of the older board members interjected, looking up from the folder before him with evident dismay. "These financial transactions through Riverford Bank to Judge Holloway's private account, they correspond exactly with his rulings on the Jenkins and Wilson land disputes. And these water rights alterations," another board member added, his tone reflecting growing concern, "they bear your signature authorizing diversions that made adjoining properties unusable for agriculture." Harrison's gaze darted around the table, finding fewer sympathetic faces than he had clearly anticipated. "Routine business decisions," he insisted, "perhaps aggressive, but entirely legal within territorial statutes that were written by officials receiving regular payments from North Star accounts," Walsh completed for him, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "The pattern is undeniable, Edward. You've been using this company as a vehicle for personal enrichment through systematic corruption." As discussion among the board members intensified, Becca watched Harrison carefully. The gradual erosion of his authority was visible in real time. His supporters growing quieter, his detractors more vocal, the undecided shifting inexorably toward Walsh's position as they reviewed the evidence before them. With the practiced instinct of a predator sensing a trap closing, Harrison's attention shifted subtly toward the boardroom's doors. The calculation in his eyes was unmistakable. He was evaluating escape options, perhaps counting on loyal security personnel to facilitate his departure once he determined the situation unsalvageable. Cooper, observing the same signs, moved casually to position himself more directly between Harrison and the main exit. Diana similarly adjusted her stance, creating a barrier to the room's secondary door. The silent coordination between them spoke to years of partnership and shared tactical understanding. Walsh, demonstrating her own shrewd assessment of the situation, pressed her advantage while Harrison remained physically present to face the accusations. In light of these revelations, I move for Edward Harrison's immediate removal as president of North Star Mining, the freezing of all company assets pending full audit, and cooperation with territorial and federal authorities regarding criminal charges. The vote that followed reflected the devastating impact of John Mitchell's evidence. Even Harrison's most reliable supporters found themselves unable to defend his position when confronted with documentation of activities that implicated them by association. The final tally stood at 11-2 for removal, with one abstention, a decisive repudiation that formalized the end of Harrison's reign over North Star mining and, by extension, much of the territory's economic and political landscape. As the legal implications of this decision were being discussed, the boardroom doors opened to admit Marshal Townsend, accompanied by 3 deputies. Their timing suggested careful coordination with Walsh's representatives, ensuring that Harrison would have no opportunity to flee once his removal was finalized. "Edward Harrison," Townsend announced formally, "I am placing you under arrest on federal charges of corruption, fraud, bribery of government officials, and interference with the administration of justice." Harrison's composure finally shattered, completely as the handcuffs were applied, his face contorted with rage as his gaze fixed on Becca. "You think this ends with me?" he snarled. "The systems I built, the men I placed in positions of power, they won't simply disappear because you've uncovered some documents your pathetic father was too cowardly to use himself." The attack on her father's memory struck deeper than Becca had anticipated, but she maintained her composure as she replied, "My father understood that dismantling corruption required more than accusations. It required irrefutable evidence and perfect timing. He sacrificed everything to compile that evidence, knowing that others would carry forward his work when the moment was right." As Townsend led Harrison from the boardroom, the fallen magnate's final venomous glare encompassed not just Becca, but Cooper, Walsh, and everyone who had contributed to his downfall. It was the impotent fury of a man whose carefully constructed empire had collapsed around him, a final acknowledgement that the power he had wielded for so long had finally been wrested from his grasp. In the aftermath of Harrison's departure, the boardroom erupted into chaotic discussion. Walsh efficiently assumed control, outlining immediate actions to secure company records and assets, while reassuring employees that legitimate operations would continue uninterrupted. Legal representatives conferred regarding potential ramifications for board members implicated in Harrison's schemes, while others discussed compensation for landowners who had suffered under North Star's predatory practices. Amid this flurry of activity, Becca found herself experiencing a curious sense of detachment. The culmination of her 3-year mission had arrived. Justice was being set in motion, yet the emotional catharsis she had anticipated remained elusive. Perhaps true closure would require time to process everything that had transpired, not just Harrison's arrest, but the unexpected alliances and revelations that had accompanied her return to the territory. Cooper approached as she stood observing the scene, his expression reflecting a similar introspection. "Your father would be proud," he said simply. "Few men leave legacies that transform entire territories for the better." "He never sought recognition," Becca replied, the memory of her father's quiet integrity bringing unexpected emotion to her voice. "He simply believed that truth, properly documented, would eventually overcome corruption." A philosophy vindicated today. Cooper glanced toward where Townsend was conferring with Diana near the doorway. "The Marshal has extended his offer regarding my situation. Conditional amnesty in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations into the officials implicated in your father's evidence. You'll accept?" "It creates possibilities that didn't exist yesterday," he acknowledged, "including that land to the north I mentioned." Becca studied him thoughtfully, seeing beyond the outlaw persona to the man shaped by the same corruption she had fought. Someone who had chosen a different path of resistance, but shared her fundamental commitment to justice. Their journey, from adversaries to allies, had traversed dangerous terrain, both literally and figuratively, creating connections neither had anticipated. "Jacob will need time to recover," she said, the seeming non sequitur nevertheless carrying clear implications. Sullivan believes the mountain air would benefit his condition." Crescent Ridge offers excellent views, Cooper replied, understanding her meaning immediately. Though I suspect my future endeavors will involve fewer stagecoach robberies and more cattle management. The tentative plan taking shape between them was interrupted as Walsh approached, having temporarily delegated the immediate business concerns to her legal team. "Miss Mitchell," she said warmly, "I wanted to express my personal gratitude for your courage in bringing this evidence forward. The territory has lived under Harrison's shadow for too long." "My father deserves the credit," Becca responded. "I merely completed what he began. A significant undertaking nonetheless." Walsh glanced between Becca and Cooper with perceptive assessment. "Marshal Townsend informs me that you both have been instrumental in this outcome, along with your associates at Crescent Ridge. He's indicated certain arrangements regarding past activities that I find entirely reasonable given the circumstances." Cooper inclined his head slightly, acknowledging this diplomatic reference to his conditional amnesty. "Mrs. Walsh is generous in her interpretation of frontier justice." "I'm practical, Mr. Cooper," Walsh corrected. "The territory needs healing. After Harrison's influence, not further division. Reconciliation serves everyone's interests better than retribution." As Walsh was called away to address another urgent matter, Becca and Cooper found themselves momentarily isolated in the bustling boardroom. A pocket of calm amid the activity surrounding Harrison's dramatic fall from power. "You never did answer my question," Cooper observed quietly, "about what comes after." Becca considered the future stretching before her, no longer constrained by the single-minded pursuit of justice that had defined her existence for 3 years, yet shaped by everything she had experienced and learned during that time. "I think," she said slowly, "that after surviving a stagecoach robbery, outlaw captivity, mine exploration, and pursuit across half the territory, I've earned the right to consider all possibilities rather than committing immediately to a single path." A smile touched Cooper's eyes, a diplomatically non-committal answer. "Perhaps," Becca acknowledged, "or perhaps an invitation to continue a conversation that circumstances have repeatedly interrupted." Understanding dawned in his expression. Recognition that she was neither rejecting nor embracing the possibility he had obliquely suggested, but rather proposing that they explore what might develop between them without the pressure of immediate decision. "I've always appreciated intelligent conversation," Cooper replied, the lightness of his tone belied by the genuine interest in his gaze. Their exchange was interrupted once more as Diana approached with news that Townsend required Cooper's presence to formalize certain aspects of his arrangement. As he departed, Cooper's parting glance carried a promise of continued discussion when circumstances permitted. Left momentarily alone, Becca moved to the boardroom's window, gazing out at Riverford, spread below in the morning sunlight. The town appeared unchanged on the surface, yet she knew that everything had been fundamentally altered by the events of the past hour. Harrison's removal would ripple through every aspect of the territory's governance and economy, creating opportunities for reform alongside inevitable resistance from those who had benefited from the previous corruption. Her own path forward remained to be determined, but for the first time in years, the weight of her father's evidence no longer dictated her every decision. Jacob would recover, justice had been set in motion, and unexpected connections with Cooper, with Walsh, with a community at Crescent Ridge she had only begun to understand, offered intriguing possibilities for a future she was finally free to shape according to her own choices rather than the dictates of a mission inherited through tragedy. As she turned from the window to rejoin the activity surrounding North Star's transformation, Becca reflected that perhaps the most valuable legacy her father had left was not the evidence that had toppled Harrison, but the principled determination that had guided her through the challenges of the past 3 years. That inner compass would serve her well in navigating whatever path she chose next, Whether it led to Denver, Riverford, Crescent Ridge, or destinations yet unimagined, the stagecoach robbery that had seemingly derailed her carefully planned return to Riverford had instead initiated a sequence of events that fulfilled her mission more effectively than she could have achieved alone. Her mysterious past had indeed intrigued an outlaw leader, but in doing so it had created an alliance that ultimately served justice in ways neither could have anticipated when their paths first crossed on that fateful autumn day. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.